Good morning and welcome to the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors meeting this October 8th, 2019. We're coming out of closed session. Can you please take the roll?
Supervisor Howard? Present. Supervisor Hemmingson?
Here.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Here.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Here.
Chair Cowan?
Here. This time we're going to take a moment of reflection. Supervisor Howard, could you please lead us in the pledge?
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Introductions of new employees. Is there any new employees today? Seeing none. And County Council, anything to report out?
No reportable action.
Great. At this time, I will request any deletions, corrections, or additions by board members to this current agenda. In order to add an item to the agenda, the matter must have come to the attention to the county subsequent to the posting of the agenda, and the matter requires action before the next regular meeting. Do I have anything, gentlemen? Okay, so we'll go on to reports. Supervisor Berkowitz, you want to start us off?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Well, several weeks ago, our board attended the Rural Counties Annual Conference. There were several programs of interest to counties like ours. One of those was by Doug Griffith, the author of 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. His presentation was to show how communities can grow and thrive by showing the universal challenges that limit community access and tips how to overcome them. Another program of interest concerned the terrorism threat. The presenters were Dennis Guerin and a supervisor special agent of the FBI and a state assessment center representative. They talked about the threats and challenges that face government agencies to combat terrorism and how the FBI and the state of California are meeting the ever-evolving threats on the internet. For example, we learned that currently there are over 5,000 investigations involving international terrorism and over 1,000 investigations involving domestic terrorism. We also learned about a new program called Golden State Natural Resources that's designed to remove biomass from our forests and turn that debris into pellets that can be sold to foreign governments like Japan. It's designated to improve air and water quality, and provide wildlife habitat and provide more jobs in rural areas and lessen forest fires in our area. Last Thursday night, I attended a chamber mixer at the Harrington House. They're making great progress on this shelter for battered women. Lately, we've had many people attend my daily town hall meeting to express that squatters are taking up residence on their property and that property owners can't do anything meaningful to kick these people off their property. I feel that it's only a matter of time before things will get out of hand and there will be a physical altercation. And that's my report, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Berkowitz. Supervisor Howard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Supervisor Berkowitz mentioned, we had a great meeting in South Lake Tahoe for RCRC this year. He mentioned a few of the speakers. I'll add to his comments, specific to Doug Griffiths. Great guy, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. There's no question you reflect back on several of the comments during that presentation and see a lot of that here in Del Norte County. We get divisive sometimes in our conversation and our rhetoric, and it often turns directions away from really where they need to be focused, which is on the future of not only our community but our children. And so especially as elected leaders and being leaders of this community and being that face that helps point those arrows in the right direction, I think it's important that we continue to reflect on those words that Doug gave us. I bought a book, and I'm going to continue to spout those virtues here, and I hope my fellow supervisors will do the same. Also, Rob Curley, great catch by RCRC to bring him on board. Rob is the current editor of the Spokesman Review in Spokane, Washington. Small kid growing up in a small town in Kansas, he always had this passion for journalism. And this passion for journalism basically led him into what he feels is a self-proclaimed geek and nerd with a fascination in technology. And as he grew up, he really started diving into the early stages of the internet in the 90s and essentially created what amounted to some of the first online newspapers that we're seeing today. As he reflected back with us, he has felt social media in particular, and called out Mark Zuckerberg, has essentially killed how we interact with people in our community and interface. And those relationships that we normally build through face-to-face contacts, through handshakes, disappear. And his message to us was very clear. Be nice. Especially your local newspapers. Be nice in how you report, focus in on your community, and ensure that when your community is focused on, it's stating the facts, not fiction that's out there, not rhetoric, not rumor. His message resonated loud and clear with me as a message that we could all be nicer where we're at. And so having Rob there, Jerry, I really appreciate you guys landing him. His message is specific to being nice, is free of charge. They just had to pay for his travel to get there. There was no fee other than that. And he does this throughout the United States. His calendar's fairly booked, but the bottom line is, Rob, really appreciate your time, really appreciate your message to all the rural counties. Also spent a great deal of time with the director of Visit California, Carolyn Batetta. She's been with Visit California for as long as I could remember. When I was back in my chamber days, I advocated with her and Mike Sullivan down in Sacramento when she was a little lower level and not the president and CEO of Visit California. She's made her way pretty high up in that organization now and has a lot of folks that really focus in on attracting the next new visitor to our state. But it was very clear in her presentation that Northern California in particular lacks a lot of the same resources that are given to the area to bring that next new visitor in. And spoke a great deal with Carolyn about that, especially with our future opportunities with the Olympics and the coverage of Del Norte County in the Olympics come July 24th, 2020. And how Visit California could help out with that. So had some meetings set up here in the near future with their Vice President of Communications and hoping to spur some conversation and additional resources into Del Norte County to better prepare for that message that will be delivered on Del Norte County, Crescent City on July 24th, 2020. Also spent some time with Malia Cohen and Fiona Ma on the last day of the RCRC meeting. Appreciate RCRC bringing them there. Fiona Ma, new treasurer of the state of California. She is very clear in her message about my door's open for business. Come get some money from me. And I certainly would like to see us do that. With Malia, it was really focused in on split zones and Prop 13. I know she was here yesterday. I spent some time with her. I know she met with our chair. I think it's important that we pay attention to Malia as our new representative for the Board of Equalization, as she will be an advocate for us, and she was here long before she got elected to that board. Also attended a proactive financial goals committee meeting, and in addition, some discussions with both Joel and Heidi on cannabis, and that spun out of our last board meeting. And then also had a great deal of conversation with Senator McGuire on Thursday, specific to the upcoming town hall where the California Transportation Commission meeting will be held here in November. And that's the end of my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Our local transportation commission met last week to handle minimum of business. Nothing to report on last chance grade this time. We also helped to coordinate another community service project at the animal shelter on West Washington. We are reaching out with probation and several of our county departments, state, federal agencies to deploy additional probation services for departments that are depleted and they don't have the budget So we're putting these folks to work with community service hours, additional projects. So if you have a project that you think needs some help, we'll be coordinating this. Please contact me, and we'll move forward in getting these young folks and juveniles out into the community, break a sweat, and make our community a better place to live. Also participated in the 20th Annual Sea Cruise Car Show. Our show and shine Friday afternoon was downtown. 225 vehicles showed up for the Saturday. The Classic Antique and Hot Rod Show participated in, and it was a wonderful event. We had great weather, as you all know. Big thanks to the Chamber of Commerce and the Northern Knights for organizing this, the 28th annual event. That's my report.
Thank you. Supervisor Hemmingson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As was reported, we had an RCRC annual meeting, and as was said, presentations by Rob Curley, the newspaper journalist, Doug Griffith, the author of 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. Those were just absolutely superb presentations. And also the Visit California group who talked about global marketing efforts and trying to salvage the ever-changing retail industry for brick and mortar with all the online competition. So pretty important stuff. Also, one of the presentations, as was mentioned, Homeland Security, the vulnerability of American communities. A pretty important topic. Also had a presentation on the modern day library, how it's changed and evolved with computers and the internet and all that. And some libraries in their communities have gotten to where they're loaning tools to do projects. You can find out how to do it on the internet, but you may not have the tools to do it. So some of these communities are really changing the look of their libraries, I think, for the better. So that was a pretty interesting presentation also. We had the banquet and the basket raffle, which we participate in every year. And Kylie, who did an absolute wonderful job for our basket. So we were pretty good contributors, but raised over $61,500 for the charities of the chairman in his county, which is where that money goes. So that's a pretty big deal. That's a record. Last year was a record. The year before that was a record. I mean, we continue to raise the bar, and what a great organization. They do a lot to help counties. At the directors meeting, Kim Van from USDA, which I had a chance to meet with personally earlier, about funding opportunities for our county. She gave a presentation, as was noted, State Treasurer Fiona Ma, as well as 2nd District Board of Equalization, Malia Cohen. So those were all great presentations. It was a worthwhile opportunity for us to be part of. On the local front, had a meeting with Chief Probation Officer, Sheriff Apperson, about maybe some voluntary patrols and some of these low-level crimes that are annoying to all of us, but pretty impactful to the people that they do these crimes against personally. So we're trying to find ways of curtailing that a little bit. As was mentioned, I had a proactive financial meeting, a discussion of county vehicles, had a Dungeness Crab Gear Innovations conference call. We had a Border Coast Regional Airport Authority meeting where we approved some work orders for GHD, approved our airport capital improvement plan. And I did go to the Harrington House Mixer. I was a little bit tardy, so it was pretty much over by the time I got there. And I went to the First Friday downtown and Sea Cruise on Friday. And then Saturday, I went to all the Sea Cruise activities and looked at all the cars. They were great. And late this afternoon, the Wonder Bus ribbon cutting at the Family Resource Center between 5 and 6. So if you can be out there to join us in that, that would be a good thing too. And that's it for me.
Thank you. After our last supervisor meeting, I also traveled to Lake Tahoe for RCRC. I always find the conferences very informative, and we did have some great, very, very motivated or motivating speakers, so it was very enjoyable and worth our time. Had a meeting with our sister city, Rickus and Takata, to go over December visit festivities. As Supervisor Hemmingson pointed out, we had a Border Coast Regional Airport Authority meeting. Spoke briefly with CDC regarding some cannabis concerns of a constituent, and had some meetings or spoke with constituents regarding some cannabis issues. I think those conversations are ongoing. Had a meeting with Senator McGuire discussing on our progress, what we're doing on the different fronts of homeless. There seems to be like 3 different fronts for me, I like to say, different pockets and different areas that we're working on. So went over all that. Talked about last chance grade, progress that's being made there, and again, he will be back up for the town hall in November. Spoke about what's gonna happen with CDC, and then also discussed the progress with the RN program. Attended a Republicans Women's Dinner last week, met with several constituents to discuss some ongoing issues in their current neighborhood, and then ended yesterday with a meeting, met with Malia Cohen from the Board of Equalization. It was a good meeting, kind of got off topic with just some, well, not off topic. She discussed some things that she would like to see happen and changes that she'd like to make within the department, which I found very interesting. And some of it was just streamlining some educational pieces. And she just had some really good, fresh insights. So it's nice to hear. It's nice when someone new gets in there and is able to bring a different outlook. So the meeting went well over what we had scheduled, but it was a good meeting, and I was glad that she took the time to come up here and meet, and I'm glad she got to meet with you, Supervisor Howard. And that is it for me. We are going to have go on to the consent agenda at this time. Do I have any public comment regarding the consent agenda items only, items 1 through 11?
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Second.
So I got a motion and second and no public comment. Kylie?
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Okay, so all our timed items are not up to there yet, so I'm going to move right along to item 17 under our general government.
Madam Chairman, I need to recuse myself on both item number 17 and 18. I have a conflict of interest.
Okay. So item 17 is approve and authorize the chair to sign a 10-year lease agreement with Northwoods Electric for their new facility located at 1270 Front Street, Suite B, and 1279 Second Street, Suite C, totaling $6,405.37 per month, as requested by the Director of Child Support Services. Aaron?
Good morning, Board.
Good morning.
Here, I'm going to pass out first a price breakdown between the lease so you can review and see it.
Okay.
So this has been a long process that the Child Support Department has been investigating for the past several years. It started off with a veneer study, and then we submitted an RFP to our community. As a result of the RFP, it is a recommendation of the department to move forward with the Northridge Electric facility on 2nd Street at this time. So in general, I'd love to answer any questions the board would have about this lease.
Gentlemen, any questions for Mr. Goodwin?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Supervisor Berkowitz, were you?
Go ahead.
Okay. Uh, Aaron, I have some concerns about this lease.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking at the parking, I was looking at the tenant situation between the Front Street and the Second Street. I counted 31 spaces, 2 handicaps of parking with, I think there are 4 or 5 tenants there on the Front Street side. I'm looking at the back side of public parking only. There are a couple of more businesses. There's a law firm there and the arts. I just am really concerned that you don't have enough parking to accommodate this this lease, and it disturbs me that people are going to have difficult access. Already there is an existing parking problem at the Front Street parking lot. I've talked to the folks there. They're complaining that they don't have enough parking spaces to accommodate their business. I think this moving over of this lease will kind of complicate things.
I understand.
Did you take that into
The
consideration?
parking has always been something we've discussed over time because it is a concern, and we have the benefit now with our current facility with a public parking lot immediately adjacent to the facility. With all the other offers that we've looked at in the RFP, some were available, some were planned to be built. In this case, there is not. So as a way to mitigate that or as a way to investigate that, what we did is I measured the street side access on 2nd Street. In total, it's 240 feet on each side of 2nd Street. So it's a 480 linear feet. When we look at the plan proposal for street side parking, it's 6.1 meters, so approximately 20 feet per parking. So on 2nd Street alone, it can occupy 24 vehicles. We have 18 staff, but like you mentioned, there are 2 other businesses on 2nd Street. There's an attorney's office and then there's a nail salon. At the attorney's office, they use 1 vehicle. There's 2 employees in the facility. 1 person gets dropped off in the morning, so they don't occupy parking. The other person does park a vehicle, so that does add to it. And then the nail salon has approximately 2 to 3 vehicles per day at a time during working hours. So it is tight in 2nd Street, but in addition to, there's also Front Street. So there's an additional 240 linear feet. So as it is right now, there is available parking. Yes, it would be tight, and I do admit that. And it is one of the things that makes this a little bit more difficult. And so I did look at that, and I did investigate that. And as it sits right now, with our vehicles, with our employees, they do have available parking immediately adjacent to the facility. Now, as far as customers go, the parking lot that's actually in the B Suite facility is available to the public. So the public would never have access to the 2nd Street side because that's just for our secured confidential area, just for employees. So the parking lot would be available on the front side of the building, which as it is with our current parking, you know, some people, we do struggle with parking in that one. Not as much as we would here, but the customers themselves would have access to the parking lot in the front of our building, which does include handicap accessible parking, and which also includes a private, secure, protected area.
The other issue I have and continue to be troubled by is the amount of tenant improvements needed
Understood.
for this existing facility. It looks like between 1270 Front Street and 1279 Second Street, you're looking at an additional $130,000 worth of tenant improvements.
Absolutely.
Now, again, I'm comparing oranges to apples in your existing situation. What's necessary? I always like the idea of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. What's the existing situation at the alternative site where you're currently there, with plenty of parking, I might add? What kind of costs are involved in tenant improvements there?
Well, so when looking at these 2, the best job I can do is compare apples to apples. So what I did break down, because we needed a move or a change of facility, and that through a conversation that we had, I did investigate with TAB extensively as far as what we can do with our current configuration and change it necessary to meet our demands. And the big parts in the RFP was the private interview rooms. Currently, if you've been in the facility, I know you've been there, several of the other supervisors and the members of the public have been in there. There is no confidentiality that we can afford with our customers. And with child support services, we deal with people that deal with complex family situations. They distribute personal information, etc. So we needed to change that. In addition, we needed to change the safety of our employees. How it's set up right now is that we have open access into our public and private space. There's only a marginal countertop where someone could, if violent, could jump that. So that was a huge concern, especially with the increase of active shooter scenarios that we face in our nation. So answering the question that do we need to change, whether it's a facility or a current facility, is an absolute yes. And so what I did is to compare the overall numbers in talking with Mr. Barnes, he was very responsive and very professional. I enjoyed working with him. And Matt Fearon, who was the same, is that it took down the overall aggregate cost between the entire life cycle of the 10-year lease. And in conversations with both of the individuals that were part of this process and our conversations is as a federally and state-funded organization, it is if they meet the demands of the RFP, which in both their cases, they don't meet all of them, but they meet the most, because the biggest one we would also like is to be out of the tsunami run-up zone, and that wasn't feasible in this case. So they meet the same demands set out in the RFP, but one is cheaper. And in this case, it was Northridge Electric. That's why I provided the breakdown spreadsheet to validate that document. And that is one of my biggest drivers. There are intrinsic benefits to both of the sites, and I do admit that. With TAB, there's the adjacent parking. We've been there. With Northridge Electric, I do truly appreciate the location. I think it gives us very high visibility in our community. Anybody driving down and up 101 would be able to see our location. It's a popular location, which is a devil's advocate because it does, cause parking issues. But we see and demonstrate that we're part of this community, and we highlight that to our community because we are here supporting families and children.
Anything else?
Madam Chair?
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Thank you. I'm concerned about the original lease. Was there an original lease that was submitted by Tab and Associates, submitted to you or somebody, that was changed in some way to reflect a different square footage? Is that true?
I've never heard of anything with the square footage. That is new to me as far as a square footage change. What I know we were talking about is in the proposal with TAB, we are actually withdrawing part of our lease in that negotiation, square footage wise, whether or not we have a training room that is not occupied as much as we can, and we shouldn't have it. It's not effective. And so the square footage was amended to include and incorporate the actual facility itself. So the area will be occupying, but I haven't heard anything in regards to an alteration of square footage.
So let's talk about the lease itself.
Yes, sir.
Was the lease that was submitted by Tab and Associates different than the lease that was written up by the county?
Absolutely. There's a form statement that for our asset protection, that we drafted up that aligned both of them together. So there's one form and a preference that the landlord offered us, and then the preference that county council was comfortable with offering it back. So this is something that came through the negotiation side. And if it's a formatting issue, I understand there are preferences, but ultimately the brass and tacks of the agreement, I didn't need the fine details. What I was looking for was CAM costs, square footage costs, COLAs, et cetera, the TI costs in total, because that's what was used to calculate the total lease life cycle. So if there's a preference on how it's formatted, it wouldn't make a difference in the calculations, and I haven't heard anything about a square footage adjustment.
So you're saying that there's no material difference between the lease that was offered by Tab and Associates and the one that you drew up?
What do you mean by a material difference?
In other words, anything, for example, square footage, you're saying that there was never any mention of the square
Nothing
footage?
at all to my recognition. I mean, when doing this proposal, and quite honest with you, it was a very hard decision. I know when initially coming to this to the board and talking about it, I stated I'll put good faith effort into the discovery of this, and it has spoken to both of the bid proposals, is that it's going to come down to the cost. And I even, in open candor to both of the people that were putting bids on it, I wasn't cross-talking and trying to bid one off the other, and that's, in my mind, it would be unethical. And so in no ways or aspirations would I do anything that would dissuade one candidate from the other.
Assuming we may have some additional growth in this county, is there any provision for growth on the facilities in either of the proposals?
So, two thoughts on that. Number one, our organization actually doesn't need to grow. We need to reduce our sizes, and we've taken that effort. It's something that we've talked about privately, is that as our community and our society is becoming more technologically advanced, the individual caseworker that we have and employ is becoming more efficient because they have access to a lot of data. And so, yes, in the heyday, we used to have 40-plus employees, but as we sit right now with 18, that would be the largest feasible size our staff should or ought to be. On the second point, there are adjacent units. One's occupied by Northridge Electric at this time. During this lease investigation, that side was offered and is available, in addition to the workers' comp attorney that's immediately next to us. He's on one-year lease, and in conversations with the landlord, it's tentative whether or not he'll continue. And it's only about 800 square feet, so it's not large. So there is expansion, but whether or not we would ever need to expand, at this time, I would say that's improbable.
Did either side offer any kind of an escape clause on the lease?
Sure. So with the two escape clauses, there were some differences in the two. The one that was proposed and how the process went with Northridge Electric, I received the information, the generic, hey, this is my square footage, this is my cost per square foot, et cetera. He gave me the raw data, and then that was given to county council to produce the lease. So we were the first ones to produce the lease to give to him. With Tony Barnes with TAB, he produced the initial lease, which went to county council, and then we made our alterations as need be. So with those lease terminations, the first one with Northridge Electric, this is something, obviously, with termination clause, it's something that's very known to the county and to the Board of Supervisors that needs to be adhered to and needs to protect us, and I agree with that. It's our county council recommended lease termination, which is we are responsible for any build-out costs. Makes sense. Both bid proposals mention that we have to be responsible for our build-out costs, and I totally agree with that. With Northridge Electric, if we choose to terminate, an early termination for convenience, we're responsible half of that lease unless it's occupied at the same time or occupied thereafter. And if it's occupied thereafter by someone that's at a lower rate, we're responsible for that difference. So that's with Northridge Electric. Now, with TAB, there was one major stipulation because he was much more liberal with this, and I'll be honest with it. But one facet that was trying to sell us on was the fact that we can terminate for cause if we lose funding. Now, I understand how that's on the surface, it seems like a very good concession, but ultimately, probabilities. What is the probability of the federal government and the state general fund stop supporting child support services is very low. So it is nice and it is a good offer, but ultimately, having the lease termination clause that would be addressed and negotiated, talking about how much portion of a remainder lease is more appropriate. But I admit that TAB was more liberal with their termination.
Okay.
You're welcome, sir.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. And Liz, County Council, can you discuss the lease and what
Yeah,
happened?
I think I can answer, follow up with Aaron's discussion and shed some light on the County Council end of Supervisor Berkowitz's questions. We kind of came in more toward the end of the RFP process and keeping in mind the other lease that's still going on. We knew that the termination issue was a big issue for this board and had been told specifically by board members that they wouldn't want to approve another lease that did not have a termination for convenience clause. So we came in toward the end, received two documents from, which were the two that our director, Goodwin, is discussing, which is the TAB proposal and the Northridge Electric proposal. We don't know what people want to do in terms of cost. We don't know what the square footage is. We're not in the buildings. We're not in the negotiations. So either we would leave blanks for those terms and allow the director with his negotiations to fill those in, or we would put in straight whatever came to us in the document. So we are not, changing those type of things. Most likely we're leaving blanks for other people to fill in what the actual cost is and allow for them to do the negotiation or put in, whatever the square footage is. Because again, that's not something policy-wise that our office does. We do the wording of the lease. The form that we received from TAB, first of all, we did not receive a form at all from Northridge Electric, and we were being asked to draft 2 leases in which Director Goodwin wanted to do a side-by-side comparison of both of those leases. It's pretty hard to do if one of them is written by us and one is on a CAR form. A CAR form is pretty... it's not personalized. It's
Will
you can
explain
fill in
what a CAR
okay,
form
so
is?
a
I
CAR
know what it
form
but
is
California Association of Realtors.
yeah, so
form.
it's a
standard
Realtor
form.
Association standard form. It's a commercial lease agreement that comes from the California Association of Realtors, and it's pretty common for landlords to use. It tends to be a little bit more friendly toward landlords, and in this case, we're the tenant, and so we generally don't use those. It hasn't been the practice of our office to use those because we believe we can write a bit friendlier terms to the county if we're on the tenant side. And again, because Director Goodwin wanted to do a side-by-side comparison, what we did was converted all of the things that they wanted or their lease said into a side-by-side and did the same for Northridge Electric. That form is taken off of what we've been using in the past. So we've used other agreements. This one is the same as the others that we used, and very similar to the one that we did with Mr. Fearing in the beginning with AOD, minus the change in the termination for convenience. So that's why there was any changes with that. Usually when people are in negotiations, we'll get back red lines of what they want changed. So if they don't like it or if somehow it wasn't an adequate portrayal of what they wanted in the CAR form, we would receive that back in some sort of a red line, which we did eventually from Northridge Electric. There was a couple red lines that went back and forth, things that they wanted changed. We did not receive anything back from TAB, and I don't know if that's because, I don't know exactly where the negotiations ended with TAB, and so where it just became more clear to Director Goodwin on which direction that he wanted to go. At some point, if he's no longer negotiating with someone and he has made a decision, we don't want to see another lease back over and over again because we're so short-staffed that we don't want to work on projects that are ultimately not going to go anywhere. So, and it also costs the department money when they use our services. So if they've already made a decision, it's unlikely that they would send back red lines for us to continue to work on. I'll talk about the termination clause for just a moment. The termination clause, they're the ones that were sent back to both of the proposal makers, TAB and NRE, is exactly the same. So we sent them the same thing, which means this is what we want as the county, not the clauses that anybody else had requested or asked for. And the clause was termination for convenience. It's a 90-day notice, and it is for any reason, not just loss of funding, could be loss of funding, but not just loss of funding. And it follows what the board had requested before when AOD went through their issues with termination, which is up to half covering the build-out cost and a mitigation. So half minus mitigation, meaning if he can get it filled with the 90-day notice the next day, we wouldn't have to pay it all. If it takes him 2 years to get it filled, then we would, depending on how much was left in the lease, they would have to mitigate that amount. So they're not getting double paid, and that was the board's issue with that. The escape clause that was given to us by TAB was a 90-day notice and the ability to pay for 1 year, that they would be, child support would be responsible for the first year of payment, but after 90 days, notice that they would have to pay the build-out cost, but would not be liable on the lease. So they're actually fairly similar. The one that we sent back to both of them is wider, i.e. it would encompass the loss of funding situation. And so, on the legal end, we would see that as more favorable. Whether or not TAB would agree to that or would have agreed to that, have they had the opportunity to do some back and forth, I don't know. It's very possible that they would have agreed to a wider quote, escape clause or a termination clause. So that's kind of the legal end of it. If you have any questions for me, let me know.
And even to add to Ms. Cable's comments, the Child Support Department is a long-term tenant. We do not have the size of the previous tenant. We don't have the organizational structure. Wherever we land, it's a long-term commitment. So yes, absolutely, we need some type of escape clause. We need to have some liability protection. I completely agree with that. But ultimately, real probability is that where we land, we're going to stay for a long time. If we make this where it meets our demands, it's a safe, secure, comfortable environment, we don't have a reason to leave minus some overwhelming incident. I do believe that's an important mention.
Great. Any other questions, gentlemen, for Aaron or for Liz? Okay, at this time, I'll take public comment.
Okay, thank you.
So public comment on item 17. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. I'm Tab, Tony Barnes. I've prepared some documents for you. I'm not going to go over these completely. Who do I hand these
You
to?
can hand them to Kylie.
Okay. But let me just go over the procedure as I understood it and as I was taking place. The RFP came out, we responded to the RFP, we submitted a proposal and a lease. The lease, as was said, went to apparently your county council, came back to us on your form, was misstated. I've got a copy of it. The square footage was understated by 50%, which made our cost, instead of $6,000, it was $3,000. An escape clause that was mentioned to us as being very important was totally omitted, wasn't included in the lease. So these were pointed out to Aaron. It was my understanding that it was going to go back to county council. County council was going to prepare a lease with these changes for my review. I've been waiting for it. Never received anything. Nobody contacted me saying that you need to redline out the lease items that you don't agree with. But Aaron and I had several meetings. He was great to work with, cooperative. By the way, they've been there for 20 years. And when we talk about, and there are really significant issues in the layout of the spaces. For instance, we offer 20% more space. If you would really compare the cost, we offer a lower cost over the 10-year period. Our tenant improvement costs are $85,000 versus $130,000, I believe, from Matt Faring. If anybody would have sat down with the space planner, the guy Rich Clements is his name. He did the drawings for both spaces. He's an objective third party. You can sit down, you can take a look at the differences in the spaces, but there are significant differences. Security, Aaron talks about conference rooms. Our conference rooms were designed around his needs and were larger interview rooms, I guess, than the other interview rooms in the opposing space. Our space does not contain any common corridors. And what I mean by common corridors is that people having access, direct access to, let's say, the county space, child support space. In other words, if you were to look at the floor plans, in the fairing space on 2nd Street, there's a common corridor that runs throughout that building that the public has access to, vendors have access to, all of the tenants in the building have access to, and all of these people that have access are contiguous to, they're in the hallways of the family support space. So, parking, another issue. We have 180 parking spaces contiguous to the building, and there is off-street parking. So I'm just really confused in this, and maybe somebody can help me. It was my understanding that the lease was going to go to county council was going to bring it back to us, which they did. We didn't agree with it. We aired our differences with Aaron. My understanding was it was going to go back to county council. They're going to prepare a lease for us to look at. Never came back. Aaron and I had discussed a million different things. One of them was an escape clause. Now, the escape clause, your next item on the agenda is to discuss a lease buyout, a lease penalty, whatever it might be, of $163,000 that you incurred because you merged two offices. And I respect what your county council is saying, but you merged two offices, and it was presented to the board. Let's merge these offices. Everybody agreed to it. Jerry Hemmingson recused himself. Everybody agreed to the merger. Then at a subsequent meeting, it said, "Oh, by the way, we have $163,000 lease buyout." That didn't pass. It was a 2-2 vote with Hemmingson recusing himself again. One of the options that I presented that would have been had we completed negotiations, I offered the county the option of, after 1 year, of terminating the lease, a 10-year lease. They could terminate the lease with no penalty, just pay off the remaining tenant improvements. Now,
I'm going to kind of have to stop you. I'm kind of let you go a little bit further than the 3 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. So my 3 minutes is
No,
up.
I'm not. I'm just.
No, that's
this
fine.
is
I
where
mean,
we're going.
if you don't
And I
want to hear
know-
any more, what I'm going to basically wind up saying is that as far as I was concerned in negotiating with Aaron, we were still in negotiations. I was waiting for documents to come back from the county. They never came back. Our proposal is lease cost, 20% more space, parking, security, sprinklered, etc.
Okay.
So it's beyond me how this decision really could be made or recommended. Thank you.
Aaron, can you come up and talk about the square footage difference? And where Mr. Barnes feels that he was in the middle of negotiations and it was just, communication was stopped. So can you
Yeah,
kind
so
of explain that?
we continue the conversations, as Mr. Barn pointed out. We talked about the lease, the makeup of it. After the first review and the red line, that was when the information that was necessary to calculate the lease was available. Now, I do admit with that the termination, there was continued negotiation on that, which was correct to Mr. Barnes's assumption, or statement, sorry. But it was at that time where the raw figures, the square footage, the price per square footage, the CAMs, the TI costs, were already available between both vendors, because even though they weren't working at the same timeline, once it became available, that's when I was able to calculate those things out. So the numbers were hard to my understanding as to what I needed to calculate to determine which was the cheapest option within the RFP, because they both meet the same criteria. So we did continue the conversations, mainly to vet and understand what it is that he was going to change. But it was in that conversation between myself, county council involved, why would I spend additional monies when I already have the information that I needed to calculate the actual cost of the facility? If I already had that and I was able to calculate out that it is a cheaper alternative, because shown in the spreadsheet, it is cheaper when it talks about it does take in the APRs for the TI costs yearly. It does take into account the CAMs. It does take into account the COLAs or the CPI index increases, and that is the number that's used to calculate.
And the square footage, because I'm hearing Mr. Tabb say this is based off of the wrong square footage. So I need to understand that the square footage that was based off of both of them is correct.
So
is there a
I have never heard
clarification that
any
needs to be
discrepancy
made?
in regards to square footage until today.
So how do we figure that out?
I would have to validate the document with the architect.
And you're saying that these numbers, Mr. Barnes, are incorrect?
I don't know what you guys are looking at, to be honest with you. I submitted a proposal, I never got anything back from the county, Aaron and I continued discussion.
Okay. I need to understand that the square footage is correct, that the square footage of the building that you're in, so you obviously know that square footage, you've been in that building for a while.
Well, it is a
these-
reduced square footage because we're no longer using the training room. The square footage that's calculated in that lease is the square footage that was proposed to us by Tony Barnes.
Okay, so the numbers that you're using came from Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I have a question for Aaron, an
Yes, sir.
additional question. You also serve as the Veteran Service Officers for the county.
Yes, sir.
And you're going to be deployed soon, and wish you good luck there.
Thank you.
Is there an opportunity for you to merge your services in your dual role to serve as the Director of Child Support Services and the VSO under one roof? And could you do that at the 2nd Street facility, or could you do that at the TAB facility, your current home for 20 years?
So that is absolutely a great question, because that is something that I've wanted to do for a while. Being a department head for Child Support Services and the Veteran Service Officer, having both of those organizations under one roof makes sense for span of control. Now, there is an issue in regards to relocating the Veteran Service Officer from the Veterans Memorial Building to anywhere else. Number one, the current facility and it is occupying is free. It is free. We don't pay rent there because it is a county-owned building. We are a general fund department for the Veteran Service Office, with the exception of a small subvention funding that we receive from the state. It funds us approximately 10 to 20% depending on the year, our total budget. So it would be on the Board of Supervisors whether or not, and with the auditor and with the CAO, whether or not we can afford to move a facility to anywhere where all of a sudden it's a accruing lease, because it wouldn't make financial sense to bring a new office in and let them stay there for free. So there would be a rent charge, just like we would have to pay. Now, the attorney's office, the workers' comp attorney's office, which is adjacent to our facility, if that lease were to become available, it would be a perfect space for the 2nd Street facility. And the TAP facility, it would be a lot easier to do it. We would just carve out another office space. So yes, if we were to co-locate the two with TAB, it would be easier, but it wouldn't be impossible at 2nd Street either. We could still do something like that. But the real question would be whether or not the Board of Supervisors would be willing to move the Veteran Service Office from the Veterans Memorial Building, which seems like the designated building for it, to another location, and then charge them rent on it.
Any other questions? Okay, any other public comment on item 17?
Linda Sutter, County. This is really upsetting to hear that there's a possibility of going into another contract with Mr. Fearing when we haven't resolved the first issue with the AOD thing. And it sounds like if they've been there for 20 years and it's been working, then that means nothing needs to be fixed. And now we're going to we're talking about spending $130,000 for updates. There's not going to be the parking. There's not going to be the security. And if there is a security issue, as Mr. Goodwin described, at the current place, then we could fix that, and it would be a little bit, it wouldn't cost $130,000. I'm sorry, but, you know, earlier this year, I thought that the good news was that the Child Support Division was going to take over the place that the director, Snow, had left the premises on, I think it's on K Street.
No, this is it. Same
Oh, this
building.
was the same
This is
building?
what we're trying to rectify, yeah.
Oh, so basically, yeah,
So we're
that
doing-
makes sense. Yeah, so Mr. Fearing's going to get his money one way or the other. And it's just wrong. That's extortion. Thank you.
My name is Lupe Gutierrez, and I just have to say that I have been in that building, and it's somewhat dim and dark and not very friendly. The corridors are kind of, anyhow, not
building?
the child support.
The
serv-
current
The
location.
current one, yes. But next to that, my concern would be that around this town, I see a lot of tab with repairs that are needed, and they go unaddressed for a long time. Now, I'm not saying that that is true of that building, but it certainly should be a concern of this entire community, that I see wooded planks for long periods of time. A good example of that, and I believe it might be Tab, and I stand corrected if I'm not, but it would be our Del Norte Supply. But then again, right across from the library, a window just got put out. But I see that in an awful lot of Tab buildings. So, you know, I don't know anything about what the lease says now on repairs, but I'm, as a community member, I'm really disappointed that that should happen anywhere in our city and county.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item 17? Okay, I'm just going to say for clarification, what came before us a while ago was the lease. And to go back up a little bit, when Health and Human Services came to us to combine, the overall cost savings was there, and that was the reasoning. Yes, there was a buyout, and the community was very vocal, and Mr. Gitlin, about getting another department in there, and that's where child care came into, and Aaron started looking into it, so that he'd been looking at it for a while. It was brought before us, I think, last May, and that was the whole point, was to put, he had been looking for another facility. I think he brought that up. I don't know how long that had been going on, but he was looking to move, and so that is why this was put together, and that's when the conversation started, was to put another department over there. It worked for him, and as head of the department, it's up to him to research and do all the work, which I see he has. So that's just kind of a little background. It seemed like it was a little confusing or mistaken. So that is what has happened. That is what has stemmed from the merger before that was already done before two departments, and that was done to save money over the long term, but it did leave us with a lease that we have been paying on. So we were looking for the solution of another department, and a department that had already been looking for a new place started that conversation. So that's what has led us to today. I hope that's as clear as mud. Okay.
Madam
so-
Chair,
Yes.
I'll just add to this. This is obviously taking Mr. Goodwin quite a period of time to get to this point. This is not new. I know Future Facilities has been trying to help Mr. Goodwin with resolving these issues specific to space and reducing that. Supervisor Berkowitz and Supervisor Hemmingson both sit on Future Facilities and did recommend going out to RFP. So I'm assuming that when they recommended to go out to RFP, they had good grounds in order to do so, to advise the board that an RFP would be issued and a reason came from Mr. Goodwin to search for that new space. I am appreciative of the letter that was given to us by Mr. Barnes. Obviously, most of the concerns that were addressed by Mr. Barnes in his letter have been addressed by not only County Council, but also Mr. Goodwin. When it comes down to it, I see a very clear choice for the county to make, and Mr. Goodwin stated very clearly about that choice, which is specific to price. So either we as a county are going to advocate for the best needs of the county at that reduced cost, or we're going to advocate for somebody who's actually going to be our landlord. I think at this point, we need to advocate for ourselves and that reduced cost, as Mr. Goodwin has stated to us, which is that reduced expense. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd make that motion to approve the 10-year lease agreement.
Okay, I have a motion to approve. I'm going to second that motion. Any other
And
public?
I would request that that motion be contingent upon the termination stated in number 18.
I'd revise my motion to reflect that termination.
Okay, I will second that change. Any further comment? Kylie?
Supervisor Gitlin?
With great reluctance and lots of complicated issues, I will vote no.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
There are too many unanswered questions for me, and that's why I'm going to vote no.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. So with a 2-2, that does not pass.
County Council, how do we proceed from here? We seem to be at a stalemate.
Well, I know Director Goodwin was asking for some direction to the board if this item did not get approved. So I would suggest that the board give him some sort of direction.
So do you want him to pay a higher cost for a facility? What are you asking for, supervisors that have
Sure.
Or
said no?
what questions aren't unanswered, or unanswered?
Yeah,
so we
I'm-
can
I'll
answer?
address
Sure.
that. I'll
Okay.
address
Right.
that first. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. In my seeing this and my knowledge of this subject, which is extensive, is that we can work with people, and at the same time, the county can get the benefit of a long-standing relationship affecting this business and the relationship between people who are used to coming to the same location, no parking issues whatsoever, a future which is bright in terms of expansion, if that should be the case or not. I think we should work on developing a lease with Mr. Barnes' direct, active participation instead of having this was deleted or that was deleted kind of issue, and work out a formidable and equitable lease that is mutually agreeable to all parties. That was how I would like to see this move forward.
So you want us to ask for a lesser cost?
I think the parties need to
Okay.
sit down and get to us and get back to us. And that's an opportunity to do that at this point.
And you said, you made a comment that there was unanswered questions. So
You know,
what
I
be
would
those
like to see
questions?
this lease put on the same form, the Realtor's form, all right? I think that's what they're used to seeing. I think you would be able to understand that easily, being a Realtor.
Well, that's why I understand. I don't think we should be using the realtor's form. That's a standard form for across the state. If we've never used it before and we have something here that whole point doesn't matter. I mean, using a, it's like going into a convenience store and grabbing a form off the counter. I mean, that's just not going to work. I would much rather have our county council use a form that we've been using for, years and years. And if Mr. Barnes has a problem with that form or wants to see changes in the form, have the conversation. But to me, it seems like it comes down to money. If you're asking to use him and we need to be fiscally responsible, then we're going to have to get Mr. Tab to come down in cost, is what I'm hearing from
Well,
you
I
guys.
think then we ought to start that bargaining.
Is there any other questions that were unanswered for you?
Well, it's the lease, the parking, of course.
I think the parking was well explained.
No, I don't think so. The escape clause, I think there's a number of unanswered questions that I think that Tab ought to get together with county council, which he was expecting to do, never happened.
I don't think that's normal procedure. is
Madam
it?
Chair,
Liz?
may I exchange with Supervisor Berkowitz? Supervisor Berkowitz, when you made the recommendation for Director Goodwin to float the RFP. What was the reasoning that Future Facilities directed that RFP to be floated?
Well, I think what we were looking at here is to find out what the comparative advantages were between the applicants. And remember, there was more than one applicant, or more than two applicants.
We heard from Director Goodwin, and I'm assuming this is something similar that you heard in Future Facilities, that there was a need to change the space. Do you no longer believe that there's a need to change the space based on the discussion that's taken
Yeah,
place in front of the
basically,
board?
I don't think there is a need to change the space.
Okay, well, that's clear. That's better. I'm glad you said that, because at this point, I believe the county, in particular, Director Goodwin, has gone through a very transparent, open process, and as stated by Mr. Barnes, negotiation did take place, discussion did take place on multiple occasions. Obviously, there's apple and oranges between both locations, and at the end of the day,
I think we need to go back to the bargaining table.
well,
Let's see
at
what
the
we
end
can
of the
do.
day, then we're starting all over from
Well, we
scratch
can
on a
start all
process that
over
you
again.
recommended quite some period of time ago to get out there in RFP to meet the need of child support services. So don't want to drag this or kick this can down the road any further, but at the same time, I don't want this to become a precedent for every lease agreement that the county goes out with.
I'd like to chime in on Supervisor Howard's comments. First of all, we've already extended the tab lease for another 6 months. That's a fact. So if it's such an unbearably awful place, why even do that? Why even go through that? I don't think this has been properly vetted in Future Facilities. I was not in those meetings at those times, but I don't think it was agendized for August 30th, but it was never discussed. Suddenly a lease appears, and we're told to analyze all these minutia figures. I appreciate, Aaron, you're giving us all these figures as if accepting we're going to be able to read this and understand this in the 30 seconds we can read it. They have to be studied. Now, I think you've got a good location, Mr. Goodwin. I think it's a good location, and you need to work with this owner and get back to us and hammer out a good 10-year lease, and we need to move on from this because, in my opinion, I think the 2nd Street location is ill-suited for your operation. It will cause great discord among your employees and your clientele, not to mention the existing clientele who are servicing their businesses on Front Street. There are already complaints on this parking issue. Why are we aggravating it? Well, we can, if the law firm moves out, we can grab that if. Well, what are you going to do when there's no place to park on 2nd Street or any place else, and you got to walk across one of the 101s to get to the office there? That's problematic, and I'm looking into the future to see where your agency can best serve its public. And I don't see, in rainy weather, crossing the 101s because you got to get to this building is the answer. So I think your location is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and let's work this thing out and sit down with Mr. Barnes and hammer out a good lease that I can approve. And hopefully
That you could approve. That's
well,
the
yes, I have a
problem.
vote here. You're interrupting me, Mr. Howard. I have a vote here.
It's we.
Okay,
understand what he's
we
saying.
all
It
have
is a
votes
board
here.
of 5, not
We
just
all
two.
have votes here. I'm one of those 2 votes that you just referred to. So yes, I want to see that the public is being well served, and I don't see it with this move. So, having said that, I think you have direction from where I sit, Mr. Goodwin, as to how to proceed on this.
I guess you have direction from where he sits, Mr. Goodwin, but we still have to come up with some kind of consensus of what that direction is. And I do want to be clear that we're taking a person, our director, that this board gave a hell of a vote of confidence for not too long ago, Supervisor Gatlin,
ago, yeah,
and I'll be addressed as supervisor, please, as you like to have that respect. The supervisor position that we're elected to up here, it's not a 1, it's a 5, and it's a decision-making process. Our director has come to us and said that the space is not what he's needed, right? It's come to us through RFP, through Future Facilities, and I'm assuming you must be down there every day to know that this is not an issue for him, because you're saying that it's going to meet his needs, and he's telling you something different. So unless you're going to go down there and live in a space with the staff and then service the individuals that are coming through that building, I'm not quite clear where all this information and all this expert opinion is coming from, as currently stated. So I guess we're not going to have some kind of understanding on how best to direct Mr. Goodwin as consensus from this board if there's some disagreement on whether or not the director could be a director for the county.
Mr. Goodwin, I apologize. I personally feel like we started this process because of what Supervisor Gitlin wanted and demanded, I might add, that we get somebody in there. And at that time, it was you that was looking for a new facility. So this all started 9 months ago? I don't know, maybe less, 6 months ago, with Supervisor Gitlin demanding another department go into this to solve this problem. And you had gone and was speaking, it wasn't future facilities, I don't believe was the first time in August. I would have to refer to you, Supervisor Berkowitz, of, when this all started with future facilities, because you were on that, but you had gone and said, I needed a new building, or we're looking at new buildings. And that seemed to be the perfect fit. And I feel like for the last few months, 4 months, 6 months, you have been doing your due diligence as a director to choose the right facility. Unfortunately, that has not panned out. So now, I guess the only direction I can hear is to answer some questions, some unanswered questions. One I've heard about parking, but I think you've already answered that, so I'm not sure how to go forward with that. But it seems to me the only thing, because when I'm voting for what's best fiscally responsible for the county. And one of them is less than the other. And that's why I chose that. One, you had asked to get a new building. Future Facilities had told you to go out and get an RFP for a new building. You did the research, and we chose to take a vote on that. That did not pass. So now the only thing I see is to try to either get a better deal with both of them. I wouldn't suggest you just negotiating with one. I think it needs to be pertinent that you're negotiating with both, would be my thought, right? So are we as a board, as a party of, well, 4 in this case, asking him to go back and renegotiate with both of them? Is that what we're asking?
Yes, Madam Chairman, we
For
are.
price only?
No, for everything that we brought up.
But the price, the parking issue's already been, there's parking there.
Sure.
Okay. What was the other thing?
Well, wait a minute, there isn't parking.
There is, there's, I don't know how
Matthew.
many parking spaces out front
No.
and a full 2 streets on the
I'm
other.
sorry, that's what we're arguing about, and one is no parking. Mr. Gitlin just stated they're going to have to go over Highway 101 in order to be able to get enough parking.
That is an incorrect statement, I'm going to have to say
No,
that.
I
Are
made
you
the
arguing
statement.
Mr.
If I
Gitlin
can,
saying
I'll say it
arguing
again.
incorrect?
I'll say it again if you want to hear it.
Absolutely arguing with Mr. Gitlin.
Parking is a problem.
Okay.
It is a major problem, and it's already aggravated the aggravated problem with the existing tenants on Front Street, and soon on Second Street. It is a major problem, and I don't know how you fix that.
Okay, so back to the table. Do we want to give him a specified time on this, or are we going to drag this out further? Anybody have points on that?
Currently, Director Goodwin has papers to deploy, an order to deploy. He is not going to be available to negotiate this, and I have some concerns over process at this point because there was an RFP that was submitted. To negotiate with just one of the parties at this point puts the county in a very strange position.
Well, as I said, he needs to negotiate with
So
both.
we may want to discuss reposting the RFP with any specific information that the Board of Supervisors has brought up and give them all a shot at it again.
Okay, and who would be negotiating that with, in Aaron's absence?
Well, in this case, it
Assistant?
would be the
Assistant.
assistant who's standing in, but I would suggest that you also direct me to be involved in it so that I can
Okay.
assist her.
Is everybody good with that?
I could agree to that.
I agree with that, and Mr. Barnes, you're going to be directly dealing with CAO Serena on this face-to-face. There'll be no misunderstandings, and if there is misunderstandings, it will be with your understanding that there's something wrong here. That's what you brought to our attention before. There were things that were you claim were deleted. So I want to make sure that you're on board with that, Mr. Barnes, since you are here in the chambers with us now.
So once again, there's a process issue here that Supervisor Gitlin just brought up again. It isn't dealing with just one person. The assistant director is responsible for that department. It would be working with at least both of us and county council, not just me. And that needs to be very well clarified. And then if the board gives direction to repost the RFP, we will develop that RFP and we'll bring it back to the board for vetting before it goes out.
Okay.
So, and I just want to clarify county council's role in all of this. We are not policymakers or decision makers. We receive work requests from the department, and it's on a form. It's called a blue file. And if they make a decision and do or don't bring it back to us, then we receive the red line. We ethically can't negotiate with a represented party. We can't meet with a represented party, so we can't negotiate directly with Mr. Barnes. So it's up to whoever is in that position, either the director, whoever is filling in, to do that negotiation. And if they want us to work on it, then send us back the paperwork to draw up whatever it is. It's the same with all of our contracts. So we just follow our regular process.
Thank you for that clarification. Director Goodwin, do you have a good idea of your direction? Good answer. Is everybody on the board here okay with the direction that was given and taken?
Well,
Could we
reluctantly,
restate
yes.
that direction, just so that we have it for the record?
Yeah, reluctantly, yes, Madam Chair. However, it does affect item number 18, and just be cognizant of the solution that we or the CEO and many others tried to resolve with this. We'll continue on, but I guess that's okay with the supervisor that started this issue in the first place.
So from what I hear is we are going to direct, it sounds like we need to go back out to a new RFP. You're shaking your head no. Oh. Not yet. True, it's no longer about 17th. Now we're giving direction for a new she's thinking we're still on. Well, we kind of passed 17. Now we're giving direction, new direction, which is to send out another RFP.
I would say we revisit the RFP. We make
Revisit what
any
was there.
changes that have come through the discussion of the Board of Supervisors today, any clarifications that need to be done, repost that RFP, and accept those proposals.
And you'll bring the RFP back to us for approval before it is posted, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes,
Okay.
so there shouldn't be any questions after that.
Right.
And then we'll advertise that generally for 30 days.
Okay.
We'll receive the proposals, we'll vet the proposals, and we will bring back any recommendations after that. But there are going to be some subjective decisions to be made here. I mean, it isn't all apples to apples.
Nope, you are
But
correct.
that'll be the decision of the Board of Supervisors at that time.
Well, that was clearly pointed out in this conversation, and Jay, I just got to ask before we move forward with the pending deployment of Mr. Goodwin, how comfortable are you with this? Do you have a full understanding of his needs and what we've discussed going into potentially a new lease?
I have some of those from conversations that happen through future facilities. I'll have to sit down with him probably by the end of the day and take notes. I have the assistant director who has direct access and has to the director in the past. We'll utilize the information to best get what he sees as the direction for his department. It is a little unwieldy because I don't really want to make that decision for that director, but if we can stay in contact somewhat, I can get feedback. But at this point, there isn't a lot of solutions to this. I'm uncomfortable having the direction to negotiate with a single party at this point without giving a fairness factor to the others.
But
And
we're
when I
not
say
giving you that
others, it's
direction.
putting it out to public also and getting, others can come in.
Right.
So we're starting over in regards to the
Right.
RFP process.
We are absolutely starting over because we cannot negotiate with one. Okay. So that brings us to item 18. Well, I feel, okay, then we'll bring Jerry in and go back and forth. You want to grab him? I was just trying to get it done with him out. So we're going to go to our timed item at 10:25, which is public comment, and members of the public may address the board on matters which are within our jurisdiction. If you are addressing the board regarding a matter that is already on the agenda, you may be asked to hold your comment until that time. So is there any public comment at this time? Good morning.
Good morning. My name's Jessica Sanar. You all know me. I am the Crescent City Bureau Chief with the Wild Rivers Outpost. And I would like to invite you all to a panel discussion in Klamath on October 17th at Margaret Keating Elementary School on food access. For the past 6 months, I have been working with the USC Center for Health Journalism on exploring the needs of Klamath in terms of feeding their families. Many residents, I've spoken with residents, I have conducted listening panels with groups, and I've appeared before the Yurok Economic Development Authority Board, and many people say that Klamath needs a grocery store, and there are obviously challenges when it comes to that. But a lot of, most residents in Klamath, they are resilient, they are resourceful, they know what they need, and they need their elected officials to hear them. And so I would like to give you all
Can you give
an
it to
invitation.
Kylie for us? Thank you very much.
Jessica,
Appreciate
what time is this meeting? Yeah.
It's from 5:30 to 7 p.m. on October 17th.
It's Wednesday?
It's a Thursday, I believe.
Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you.
that. Right. I'm sorry, I'm just like, any other public comment?
Yeah, my name's Mr. Soul, and it's in regards to illegal marijuana growing. And we've got a man here behind me that runs a business, and he pays taxes. And anytime you have the illegals selling, it's undercutting his business. He pays taxes, they don't. When I've talked to two different departments, one which you guys don't control because he's an elected official, the sheriff's department, their knowledge of the medical marijuana versus recreational marijuana is zilch, zero, zip, nada. And when I dealt with the county building department, was what I called it, they got a new fancy name, yesterday, I was talking with Dominic Mello, and his knowledge is pretty far down there as far as it, and it really, with what's going on out there in the community, I mean, he's telling us with all these grows all over, woo, 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 you know, I think he's imagining it way beyond what it is. There has to be a way of sorting out your medicals from your recreationals. Just because a guy throws up the medical flag doesn't mean that he stops. Last year, 15 months ago, I asked a direct question of the building department. I said, is there a permit for going from that power pole to this garage? I was told directly, yes, it was. My plan at that time was if there was no permit, that sucker's done, whether it's medical, recreational, or for mom and pop. It's a danger to have garages with huge lights, overpowered facilities. It undercuts this man's business, undercuts any other businesses. Brookings is a smaller town. They have 7 dispensaries. We don't have all the illegal grows on every corner. They're not playing that game. You know, these Sheriff Apperson's people, oh, it's medical. We can't do anything. Check it out. THC is not medical. THC is your sticky stuff. It's your high THC levels. Your cannabis, your CBDs, which this man could tell you also, is going to be real low in THC. There's a big difference. And yet, every time you go to talk to one of our departments, they run scared. There's 4 or 5 departments that should be working together. Number one, the tax guy. Number two, we should be checking with social services for, is Miss Cowan growing? Is she collecting welfare? Because that's $100,000, the grow I'm talking about was $100,000 in the garage plus 3 greenhouses. I believe they were taking welfare, HUD, LIHEAP, all those other services. So now somebody like this guy wants to get it. He can't get it because the department only has so much. You know, we're just turning a blind eye to this problem, let alone that with all these gardens around, we're going to have minors getting into somebody's garden and getting violence. I've already dealt with the violence for over a year and a half.
Appreciate it. Any other public comment?
Hello, thank you all. My name is Zachary Conger. I'm a professional clinical counselor. I do not stand here and pretend to fully understand the complexity of your roles, but I can imagine it takes a tremendous amount of your attention, effort, and your time. So I appreciate this chance to address you, the board, here today. As a direct staff, I firmly believe communication is one of my most powerful tools. How can any supervisor be effective in their role if employees stay silent when the situation calls for collaboration? Last week, on October 1st, I submitted a letter to Madam Chairman Cohen. I have a date-stamped copy right here. The details of my requests are outlined in my letter, but I believe it'd be unprofessional to divulge any more details in this setting. My goal for today was simple, but my goal today has been achieved. I wanted to come here and not only abide by the chain of command that has been set out for me, but I also wanted to continue to advocate for my professional needs. I've been working on this matter since May of this year, and I'm eager to find its resolution. I would like to reiterate my appreciation to the board for the quality of service they provide to our community, and I look forward to your response to my letter in resolving this issue so I too can return my focus back to serving my community.
Thank you.
Mr. Conger, could you come on back here? I'm a little confused on what this issue is.
Sure.
I don't have that letter. Would you be willing to forward a copy of that letter to all this Board of Supervisors?
Certainly. On the website, I am aware of how to access your professional emails, and I will follow up today with forwarding my letter to all the supervisors.
Yeah, I appreciate your coming up here, but I'm scratching my head. What is this issue?
The nature of the matter really should be discussed behind closed doors.
Okay,
I believe that setting, but I wanted to come here about a week after I submitted the letter just to kind of be a squeaky wheel. You know, I understand the nature of your job is dealing with some very large issues, some communal issues, and my issue really is kind of solitary to myself as a provider. But I wanted to come here and thank you for that feedback. I will forward my letter
to it. Thank you, sir.
to all supervisors.
Thank you, Zachary.
Lupe Gutierrez. I really need to reiterate my disappointment in the maintenance of TAB buildings, both on the outside and the inside. And I really strongly suggest that you go out into our community and look at how many of those buildings are boarded up. And I'm saying that because I have also been in that 2nd Street building, which, like I said, the inside of it could use some improvement. If you haven't been in there, Supervisor Gitlin. And I don't know if this is appropriate or not, you can stop me midway if it is not. But I wanted to thank Supervisor Jerry Hemmingson for voting against the $5,000 contract. He was the only one that did, and I truly appreciate that vote, and I truly appreciated your argument for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Good morning.
Hi. Good morning, Robert. Actually, I was just curious, since we were talking about the lease and all, I usually come to these things and try and stay mildly on top of what's going on. But Supervisor Gitlin, he brought up this issue, and I kind of agreed. It's this horrible, huge get out of the lease payment. And so Supervisor Gitlin wanted to find something to put in there. And so a member of staff apparently needed a place to put in there, and this is a cost savings issue. So I was actually just curious, I know if I drop a piece of litter, that Roger's going to pick it up and he'll probably take a picture of himself doing it. But you really can't bet on much else, I was curious if you have a relationship with one of the landlords, maybe.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I apologize, I got the buildings confused in regards to the number 17 issue, but the other thing you might want to think about, people are going to be parking in that parking lot to go into the Department of Child Support Division, and it is a small parking lot, and it'll take away from the businesses there. So if people can't park to go in and eat at the Vita Cucina or get their nails done or the Thai place, and they're going to lose business. So I don't know. There is a real issue with the parking. As far as the safety and security of that building, the first thing that popped into my head when I read it was you can come into the front door. I've never been in that building, so, and if they're sharing it with an attorney, then the public's going to have access to it. So there could be some issues with that. You guys might want to take that into consideration. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to our item 13, and we're going to have a report from the Humboldt-Dunart Film Commission. Cassandra's here. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for coming up from Eureka.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm going to go short and sweet because we have to go meet the National Park. What are we meeting? Rangers. I have a concussion that I'm recovering from, so moments like that happen often for me, unfortunately. So I believe we have a PowerPoint? Yeah. Oh, well, I need it because I don't remember what it is. Okay, here we go. And then does this work to operate it, move it? Yes, there we go. Oh, I can't see the arrows. There we go. So this will be short and sweet because most of you guys have already seen some of this. My assistant, when I was out of town, came to the, what was it? Summit, the Economic Development Summit back in March, and was able to present pretty much what I'm going to be presenting because we didn't have too much filming after that for the year of fiscal year 18-19. But for those that don't know, we're the liaison between filmmakers and the counties we represent. We're the only film commission office that represents 2 counties in the state of California. We market the area for filming based on locations. That's how it starts. We assist productions when they come to the area with scouting, permits, vendors and crew, any type of thing that they might need. And we help assist locals when they need help. For instance, locations like homeowners, things like that, of like what to look out for, how to be film friendly. And then we help afterwards with film tourism, which a lot of times can actually bring in more dollars than the original filming. So we're required to do this free of charge, and we are purely funded by the entities who we represent. Film activity for 2018-2019, we had 38 inquiries. You can see for the fiscal year 17-18, we only had 18. So inquiries have gone up since the state of California has increased their tax incentive program. We worked really hard and part of the alliance that helped create the the new tax incentive program that will be coming into effect 3.0. And so we've had a lot more inquiries in the state of California of productions wanting to come back to California, which is really great. One of the ones that was interested in us was Top Gun 2. We did scout for that, and they really wanted us. It ended up being that our runway wasn't long enough. Too bad. It would have been really great. We did have 3 productions that did film. We had the second unit, Call of the Wild, starring Harrison Ford, which hasn't come out yet. We did have a commercial, and we had the BBC here as well. And so that totaled about almost $28,000 directly. Again, direct dollars is when they're at hotels, restaurants, permits, those kind of things. And when you add the multiplier, which is the money staying in the economy or them going out to dinner or having a day off, it was more like $82,000 for the fiscal year. Considering we've had like 7,000 before, that was a decent year. This kind of shows you the funding versus return on investment. So since we started representing Del Norte County, we've been funded about $78,000, not including the current fiscal year that we are in. Directly, that's brought in almost $1.2 million, and indirectly, that's more like $3.5 million of the true effect, economic effect, in the past, 7 years, 8 years, that we've represented the area. I can't find it. There it is. And so this was previous year's success. It did come out last year. But Bird Box, and I know that the story's been told a few times, but I'd just like to say like how our role in working with Bird Box was, because it was really great how it worked out. So this shows just how, who in Hollywood and how it works. We worked with the location manager, Doug Dresser, on A Wrinkle in Time. And he had been in Humboldt County, but knew that we had some great rivers. And he said, hey, I'm helping out the location team for Bird Box, starring Sandra Bullock. Do you have I know you've got great rivers. Do you have a majestic river with like a fork in it? And I said, do I have a majestic river with a fork in it? I sent that one photo, and we got the movie. So I just want you to know like how these things happen, and connections and working with people in previous relationships and how it goes. I'm sorry, it wasn't for Wrinkle in Time. He was for After Earth, so it was even longer ago. But having those relationships with the previous filmings that we've done is how that came to be. They filmed for 14 days in January, February, which is off-peak season, which is amazing. I'm sure it made the hotels years, as you probably already know. Some of this information, again, was already distributed. They had 351 crew members in Crescent City, which is gigantic. Most movies are about 150 to 200, unless you're Marvel, and then they might be 1,000. So 350 was really a huge amount of crew to have for that movie. And it impacted Crescent City in the middle of winter, immensely. There's some fun pictures, which I'm sure most of you guys have already seen. It is the #1 movie still downloaded ever on Netflix. It's not the #1 overall show. They had an episodic television show that was beat the movie, but as far as movies goes, it is the #1 most downloaded movie ever. I think we have a slide that shows that in a minute. So during the time of filming, they directly spent $900,000 in Del Norte. They spent $100,000 in Humboldt. And indirectly, you can see it's a little over 2.6. The impact, again, in winter, which is amazing. So again, 45 million accounts, which you can have up to, I think it's 4 or 5 people on an account, watched it the first week. 80 million accounts on Netflix watched it the first month. We won 2 awards, the Location Manager of the Year and Location Team of the Year for California, won for the movie. And so we do a lot of marketing, which you guys might have seen this slide as well too. This is a usual one for us. We get about 1,000 views. People go on our website a lot. That's our storefront. We do a newsletter, and you guys are featured in our newsletter at least every couple newsletters or so. And we're part of all kinds of organizations that help us around the world stay connected with producers and location managers and the different teams. And we're part of the International Film Commission group as well. There it is. I'm immediate past president now of FLIX, which is the Film Liaisons in California statewide. I was president for 3.5 years, and my term finally ended, which is perfect timing for me. I'm still on the board of directors, and what we do is we put on the award show for California, as well as we're now working with new filmmakers at New Filmmakers LA. And then we're starting a new event called Meet the Managers, which is kind of like a lower tier, works with upper tier managers, and then we'll provide like a wine cocktail party afterwards, and they'll be able to mingle with film commissioners. So we'll have a lot of new location people mingling with the film commissioners throughout the state of California. So there's some new marketing things that we've been doing with this organization, which is great. The new thing that you probably didn't see during his presentation was for Wrinkle in Time, we were nominated Most Outstanding Film Commissioner in the World. So that was really exciting. We were 1 of 5. We did not win. Rumor is we took second. But it was a great event, and it was with the Location Managers Guild International, and it was an honor to be nominated by the team of A Wrinkle in Time for our work on that. So that was really great. we lost to New Zealand, Mission Impossible. It's kind of hard to, compete with that, so a great man. KJ's my friend who won, so it was great. 2018, we did have 4 movies that were released, including one that was shot here, Primal Rage. Bird Box, sorry, 2. And so 2 in Humboldt, 2 in Del Norte, so that was exciting. That's the first time in over 100 years that we had 4 movies come out in the same year. So that was really exciting. When we had our red carpet gala, we had, these are the ones that were winners for your guys' area, which was really great, which we always like to acknowledge who's film friendly, and thank you for being so. I know we gave an award to Supervisor Cohen.
That was last year.
Yes. I can't get my arrow, so I was stalling. Here we go. There we go. And like I said, we have the map of the brochure, which we're adding Bird Box. I believe we already added Bird Box, correct, Nate? And that one, so the state parks have told us, and specifically actually up here, that is the #1 brochure that goes, is gone, that they have to fill that one the most. It actually, they have a one that they try to tape down to the counter, and that one actually gets stolen by tourists as well. So they've said that they've seen an influx of people who are doing the self-guided tour for checking out where movies were filmed. Hotels have reported back to us that they've now seen people stay a day or 2 extra. We have some different hotels that have actually turned it into a placard into their lobby. So it's been really great to have this map of the movies that we continually update. We're also thinking about turning it into an app for a phone so that people can do that, because again, tourism can sometimes outweigh the dollar amount that comes in from filming. We have no way of tracking that, but some of the bigger areas have been able to track that, like for instance with Hunger Games or with Harry Potter. Those are some of the ones that are, or for Twilight, for instance. I believe that was it, yeah.
Excellent.
Do you have any questions for us?
For Cassandra? Gentlemen?
Good job.
Great, thank you very much. We
Thank you for your
appreciate
time.
it. Thanks for
Keep up the
coming
great work, Cassandra.
Thank you.
And your teammate.
Drive safe.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 14 is approve a road improvement deferment. Authorize the chair to sign the deferment improvement agreement. Authorize the county engineer to release the bond for 144 Butte Street. Good morning.
I realized today that I missed some exhibits in your packet, and so I have them for you today. And I colored them. So we're here today to talk about Foursquare. Back in 1999, they did a use permit to put in the gymnasium. And as part of the use permit, there were requirements for road improvements. Since the initial 99 approval and today, there have been 3 amendments regarding parking, and each one has modified the sidewalk requirements in different ways. Earlier this year, Foursquare received a letter from the bonding company that they have been using for the sidewalk on Mackin Avenue, saying that they would like to terminate the bond. And so either Foursquare must construct the improvements, which they don't have the funds to do right now, or the county has the option to call the bond, or the solution of a deferred improvement agreement, which would give them a couple years to put in the improvements. And part of the concern that we had is, well, if you don't have the money now, how are you going to get it in the future? And with the modified parking plan, it made 2 parcels previously assigned for parking available that are single family, and they had an additional parcel that they demoed a home on not too long ago. So they're looking at selling 3 parcels to pay for the road improvements. And so we added a clause into the deferred improvement agreement stating that the funds from the sale of the properties were to be used for construction of the improvements. And I have, so on the map here in front of you, I highlighted the 3 vacant parcels, which are north of the back of the main church and gym area. And then there's also the pink is anything existing from the existing parking lots, church, gym, youth house, playground, or house. The blue represents the south side of Mackin Avenue between Butte Street and Meridian where the deferment is being requested. And the two green areas, one being the northern, I think 120 feet from Pacific on the west side of Butte, that sidewalk that's already been constructed and was a condition of the original use permit, or one of the amendments, I'm not sure. And then the other sidewalk that was required to be constructed on Meridian along the frontage of the parcel where the youth house is has been constructed. So yes, the largest segment remains, but there has been some improvement over the last 20 or so years. And I wasn't sure what questions you might have for me.
Any questions, gentlemen? Go ahead, Supervisor.
Yes, I do have some question. Who tracks these improvement deferments that we do? Sidewalks, roads, whatever that is. Do we have a way of tracking that? It seems like we defer a lot of these things down the road and nobody follows up on them, especially when there's a time limit on them, that, you know, these things go out. This has been there since '99. And so who tracks those and what do we do about them once they come up? That's just one of the questions.
We have a binder of deferred improvement agreements, and some of them have been resolved over the years, others have just sat there. The time limits are set with good intentions, however, there is the never-ending statements that are in the agreements, and most of the time they come up when the sale of a property and they're brought up on the preliminary title report, and that's when a lot of times the discussion happens on what to do.
You have another question, because we had this conversation and it came up, something wasn't recorded on a title report.
Yeah.
Right, and that's how it started.
Yeah. And the other thing, now, if we are to approve this, and these 3 lots are supposedly supposed to pay for these improvements, do we put a lien on those at the time for that and record that?
We don't have a lien, but I can read the paragraph that's in the agreement. Would you like me to do that real quick?
Well, I just want to know how do we make sure that those lots just aren't sold and we don't get anything done? They again say that we don't have the money, we use that money for something else.
I think that would be a question for County Council.
It was that specific issue we had concern about as well, and we did request to have a paragraph added, which is number 4, that they would agree to revenue generated from the sale to be used for the construction. You know, so I think it's about as enforceable as the rest of the agreement. So our office isn't a huge fan of road deferment agreements in general, but they do exist. Our county code does allow for them, and they are used for those who can't afford to do projects right now. This specific one, this particular case is a little bit different because usually when you have a road deferment agreement come to you, it doesn't have this attached bond issue, which is kind of a hanger-on from 1990s, and we're not sure, you know, why that happened in the first place. So, you know, this one has a little bit more attached to it.
So, and if I could follow up on that, so what is our recourse on these deferred improvements? If we set a timeline or a trigger and that doesn't happen, is there something we can do? Do we lien the property? Do we?
Yeah, so we haven't gone through a collection process on one yet. We may in the near future, but you know, we would basically just try to enforce on that agreement.
Thank you.
Do we need to look at our policies and procedures on this?
I mean, that's an option to the board to do that, to do, like, look at our codes on whether or not you all want to have these in the future. Right now, they do exist. And CDD has talked with me about there are ones that, you know, people really wouldn't be able to develop otherwise. So there are a lot of policy considerations as to why you may or may not want to have them.
Okay.
Can I bring back a little history? So the seller's deferred improvement agreement that was approved within this last year on Leclerc,
Uh-huh.
he has since been able to construct the improvements and it has been released. And he said he would have gone bankrupt had he not had this option. It made all the difference to him. And he told me that when I was releasing the agreement, so.
And the agreements are fine. I
Yeah.
think what we're finding, though, when the people don't do what is asked, what is our recourse? Or if it's not filed, and that just happened in a real estate transaction, of a commercial building that should have been done, and nobody caught it. So I think for me, it's just more safeguards or some type of reporting and watching to make sure once we do give them a year or two or whatever that may be, some type of follow-up, some catch, some safeguard. Supervisor, did you have?
Yes, Roseanne, what's the amount of money involved in here? Can you share that with the public on the bond?
So there is a current bond. It is in the amount of $24,555, which is not sufficient to construct the required improvements. So it is here. I'm not sure of why that amount, why we got it in the first place. I'm not sure the history. We don't typically bond for things other than subdivision improvements or projects contracted with the county, so I'm not sure why the bond existed in the first place.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and it's all here in the information that we got, Supervisor Gitlin. Okay, any other questions? Okay. What's your pleasure, gentlemen?
I would move that we approve the road improvement deferment, and authorize the chair to sign, and authorize the county engineer to release the bond.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any public comment on item number 14? Seeing none, Kylie?
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. And with that, before we move on to item 15, I'm going to take a 5-minute break. Again, if everybody could have a seat, please. Okay, so we're going to move on and start with item number 15, and that is to review and approve and direct staff to follow the recommendations as defined within the housing and homeless analysis as prepared by Housing Tools. We're going to direct staff to seek the interest of groups within the community to lead or convene in the formal development and implementation of the Homeless Coalition, as well as direct staff to begin the preparation of a request for qualifications or proposal to solicit a developer's interest in a permitted supportive housing in Del Norte County. Tony, I believe this one is you.
Chair, just
Oh,
as an
I'm sorry.
introduction, Tony's going to present this. It's a number of slides. She's going to go through those relatively quickly, but and then focus in regards to the recommendation that is coming out of this that you just read.
Right.
So she's going to go through these slides, and then if there are some questions, we may have to go to the consultant to ask those questions.
Right, and then this is all stems from hiring Housing Tools to come into our community, which they did. They had different meetings within and throughout our community. We did all kinds of surveys and questionnaires, and this is an ongoing process. So this is what came from that. And this is just the beginning steps.
Yes. So as you know, and Supervisor Cowan just mentioned, the county has been working with Housing Tools with the use of No Place Like Home technical assistance funding to prepare a report to lay out a focused and practical study to potentially address the lack of permanent supportive housing in Del Norte County. The Housing and Homeless Analysis and Recommendation document, I'm just going to refer to it as document because it, anyway, details and explores the following key points. It addresses homelessness in Del Norte County based on our point-in-time surveys, what it looks like in our community, partnerships and resources devoted to addressing and ending homelessness, what is currently being offered in our community already, as well as it provides recommended potential permanent supportive models, potentially viable sites, as well as identifies funding that's going to be needed to make these projects come to fruition. As Lori also mentioned, 3 community outreach sessions were held in Crescent City, Smith River, and Klamath, which helped define for the community affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, housing first, and provided examples of the potential supportive housing models. These sessions also provided the community with the opportunity to provide comments regarding excuse me, what they would like to see in our community, and a community perception survey was also developed and released to obtain comments relating to housing and homelessness in Del Norte County. The information gathered as a result of these community sessions and outreach, as well as the surveys and interviews with county officials, city officials, the housing authority, and the board of realtors, is how this document that was attached to your agendas was developed. So just an overview, this report provides the county not only with the potential projects that might be viable, but also financial analyses, or what developers call pro formas, of the potential No Place Like Home assisted development types. I want you to please keep in mind that this project, or the projects mentioned, as well as the sites, are only ideas and nothing specific, and that we're going to need a development sponsor to move along with additional examination and research in order to bring these projects to reality. Okay, so the first what I wanted to discuss is a new construction. It'll be a mixed-use unit, and it'll generate 80 units, 14 of which will be No Place Like Home. The remainder will be set aside for extremely low income, as well as low income individuals and families. And the overall cost for this type of development is roughly $24 million and change. And as you'll notice, that there's multiple funding sources that will be required to achieve that $24 million price tag. The next is also a new construction. This one is 100% permanent supportive housing and will generate 30 units. And the cost for this project would be roughly $7.4 million. This is a medium-sized permanent supportive housing model which will generate 30 units, 14 of which will be studios, 15 one-bedroom apartments, and 1 two-bedroom apartment for an on-site manager. The model's focus on serving the homeless community requires project-based vouchers, and those commitments to come from the Housing Authority to subsidize the low rents. And as you'll see, that I also break down what funding sources would be needed or could be applied for to get that $7.4 million. The next one is a rehabilitation project. This generates the lowest number of units, which is 10, and this is also all specific 100% permanent supportive housing. And that comes in at a cost of a little over $1.3 million. So this would consist of 10 300 square foot studios or single room units, including 1 studio for an on-site manager. The tenant population are homeless individuals with disabilities that are eligible through the No Place Like Home assistance. And this population would require intensive case management and wraparound services. They'll all require services, but this one more intense. The cost, like I mentioned before, a little over $1.3 million, and those sources are listed there of what we could obtain in order to fund this type of project.
And when,
Go ahead.
no, it's okay.
Next, I wanted to talk about some of the recommended sites that would be viable. The report itself identifies 14 sites. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them today, but the other ones were ranked and scored advantages versus disadvantages exactly like the 3 that I'm going to be discussing. As I mentioned before, the sites will require additional review for history, environmental conditions, general plan compatibility, and any unique characteristics, and are at this point simply recommendations. So basically what Housing Tools did in order to recommend the sites, the research that was done was they researched and used our county housing element, they researched this, they used the city housing element, and they worked with a realtor from the Board of Realtors, and they also used something called LoopNet, which I believe lists properties for sale of this magnitude. They also researched site characteristics specific for this type of program, which was size, the price if listed for sale, zoning restrictions if available, availability for services, mostly water and sewer, and they also looked at surrounding neighborhoods and neighbors, land uses, and additional site background that was provided by the Board of Realtors. Here are a few of the sites that they've identified. Williams Drive, and this is the property that's adjacent to Juvenile Hall. The primary factor for this deciding to include this one were its location and affordability, or the flexibility, excuse me, that is afforded by its county ownership. Next is Washington and Highway 101, which is the property across the street from Walmart. This has the optimal size, features, zoning, and for this size of a project. In addition, is extremely well located near public transit and a variety of services. There's a bus stop located right at the site, Walmart's across the street, Sutter Coast Walk-In Clinic is next door to the west, and Sutter Coast Hospital is just 700 feet away. And the property is listed for sale. The final site that I'm going to talk about is at North Crest in Washington. This is the property that's across the street from Open Door Community Clinic. This site provides an opportunity to convert an underutilized commercial property on a highly visible intersection to attract permanent supportive housing projects. The site is listed for sale at an affordable price given the size and the improvements and the location. This would involve a rehabbing of an existing structure and converting the space to residential units. So the development would require fewer resources for funding, and the construction period is shorter. However, due to the size, it's going to be smaller and create lower rent. It would also require assistance from the Housing Authority for project-based vouchers, and potentially other rental assistance is needed. The report, like I mentioned, goes more in depth in relation to all of the properties researched, including the advantages as well as the disadvantages. All right. So also part of the scope of what Housing Tools is doing for us is helping us to identify other potential funding sources that could help us in addition to No Place Like Home. So ultimately, any potential development cannot be realized without securing any additional resources from outside Del Norte County and leveraging such. Moving forward with any potential permanent supportive housing project will require a development sponsor to take on project loans and additional third-party funding. Del Norte County, like any other small governmental agency, faces resource challenges that are making it difficult to meet community expectations for many critical services. So some of the additional permanent or potential funding options, I'm going to briefly touch on them, but one of them is the tax credit equity, either the 9%, which is the competitive version, or the 4%, which is the non-competitive version. And if you'll notice, most of the models do require tax credits. The big one is non-competitive, No Place Like Home. The competitive allocation has been accepted by Del Norte County. It's being reserved for us in the amount of $500,000. And these funds are going to be provided to a permanent supportive housing project developer as a deferred payment loan, as a residual receipts loan, basically is how it's done. The big pot of money is the competitive portion. They're breaking this up into up to 4 notice of funding availability. They just recently, on September 30th, issued the second notice of funding availability for competitive funding. Unfortunately, because we don't have a development sponsor, we're not yet ready. We hope to be soon, and that's why I'm here today, to kind of get some direction from you to move forward. So these are loans that are 55-year loans that will be taken on by a development sponsor in order to be able to brick and mortar build these permanent supportive housing units. Some of the additional funding sources that were identified were the state permanent local housing allocation. These funds are funded by State Senate Bill 2, the Building Jobs and Homes Act. There will be an anticipated notice of funding availability for the formula allocation of this grant in February of 2020. The next is the Partnership Health Plan of California, which is our current provider of Medi-Cal services or benefits for our community. Del Norte County Health and Human Services has received a commitment of $490,000 from this grant program that we will also be able to utilize towards a permanent supportive housing project, as well as Mental Health Services Act funds. And the state has an allocation of approximately $418,000 set aside for Del Norte County from the use of mental health services funds. Also mentioned previously was the project-based vouchers that will need to be utilized. And 2 that we're really familiar with is the state home funds, which we've used in the past to fund Summer Park and Hidden Creek. And then also the state community development block grant funds. Those are a little bit trickier because those can only be funded for pre-development costs and site, and it cannot be used for capital cost of building permits housing. So the development sponsor will have to work to see what works best for his project. All right, I'm getting there, I'm sorry.
No, there is a lot of
There's
information.
a lot. While it is clear that the scope of homelessness is ever-changing in Del Norte County and that there are tremendous community concerns regarding its impacts, which in some cases has been divisive, it is also clear that the community partners and members wish to be engaged and involved in a solution, which is phenomenal. Solutions will ultimately have to be those that are at a scale that is appropriate for our community, and at the same time address the greatest need. These types of solutions are best arrived at through a collaborative, community-driven decision-making process. This will help to build the foundation needed to attract new resources to the community to help us realize our goal. So while we continue addressing the needs of those experiencing homelessness in our community, It is also important for the county and the city to continue to work together proactively, not only with the potential development sponsors, but also with funding sources to ensure that the necessary steps are being made and the development queue is constructed. So, today, I wanted to give you guys a brief overview of the report that was produced by Housing Tools, but I'm also here to get some direction. I need direction from you in order to seek the interest of groups in our community to lead or convene in the formal development of a homeless coalition. Housing Tools, the information that was gathered as a result of our public outreach, the community wants to be at the table in regards to what's happening in the homeless community. This homeless coalition will help with collaboration, will help with accountability, will help with the shared vision, as well as community engagement. And then also, in order to move forward to seek the interest of a development sponsor so we can get to the next step to find out if a permanent supportive housing project is feasible for Delaware County. Any questions?
Gentlemen. Okay, Mr. Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes. Thank you, Tony. Wonderful job. You sparked a lot of questions that I hadn't thought about previously. I guess starting with the last thing first, what is expected of the county on item number 1 to seek the interest of groups within the community? What level of participation are you asking the county to be part of that?
This is going to be a community-driven and managed coalition that's going to meet to discuss development of programs, partnerships with other nonprofits. They're going to actually include the opinions of the homeless group, individuals, our community members,
right.
As well as collect data from the community. And what they see as programs that could help us further reduce our homeless issue. So it's going to be a community-driven effort. There will be potential point of contact for the county so they can relay that information to that person, as well as help us with our data collection as far as the No Place Like Home project in the future.
Cool.
This will be an ongoing coalition.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great idea. I just wondered how we were going to put it all together, so that's great. Now, getting back to some things that I really hadn't thought of. The non-competitive funds, the $500,000 that we got that we're going to give to a developer, they have to pay that back?
That is included in the loan, yes.
And they pay that back to the state?
Yes.
They don't pay that back to us?
No. The term, yeah, it's a.
So we're just kind of a standby
pretty much
person. Okay. And then on and the other money is the same way. The MHSA funds, do they pay those back at all? Are those just?
I'm not 100% sure on that. I believe those are grants.
That's all.
Yeah.
Grant.
It's an allocation.
Okay.
So those would not require payment.
Okay. And then the 3 options that were there, probably 3 different levels of county involvement as far as providing services. Have you gone over those, Heather? Maybe Heather, this is a better question for you. The 3 options that were there with the different sized facilities, are there different levels of support services that we're going to have to provide? Is one going to cost the county more in funding? Have you gone through those in any?
I would say I haven't analyzed this in detail. I have been a part of this group and I've been included in the meetings with Housing Tools and I've reviewed this plan. I haven't done an analysis, but what I would say is we're going to go wherever we're needed. We're serving these clients in the community in several places, and I think it would help to have concentrated efforts once there is the formation of this group, I suppose, and people come together and there's more of something that we can form an analysis of. I'd be happy to present that.
Cool. Thank you. That's about all I have. Thank you.
Tony? Does Housing Tools offer any kind of temporary facility? And I see this, everything's brick and mortar on these presentations, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so there's so many of the folks who are involved in this lifestyle are migratory. They move on, they stay for a short period, they move on. So I'm wondering if in this component there isn't an opportunity to have some kind of all the money that are being spent, some kind of a temporary facility where someone can stay for a night or two and move on.
So you're talking about more
transition.
emergency or transitional?
Yeah, and I say this because there's a lot of money in permanent brick and mortar buildings when the population we're talking about is oftentimes not permanent. They're very migratory. They're moving around and they're moving from here to there, and that's why we see an increase in the amount of people up here for the time being. So is there any opportunity to explore that?
Unfortunately, with the funding sources that are available under the No Place Like Home and the other ones that were mentioned, these are specific to chronically homeless, permanent supportive housing. As a part of the Homeless Coalition, I would like to have the community address some of the transitional or potentially emergency, but it'll have to come from completely separate funding.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes problematic. And I totally understand that all services that are being offered, whether permanent or transitional, there will be an outreach of services available in drug, alcohol treatments, etc. But I'm concerned that in this model that you've presented for us, and you're asking for further support in this, is that there isn't that component in this funding tool.
No, this is specific for brick and mortar.
Yeah. Now, what about existing buildings? Or this is everything you've shown us is vacant land, correct? On
No,
these
there
three?
was a commercial.
There was one,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Of the 14, I think you mentioned there were 14.
Yes, there's a total of 14,
And
yeah.
there was one building that would need to be renovated. What about existing multifamily unit buildings that are already here?
Like I said, these are pretty much just a snapshot of what could happen.
Yeah.
Once we obtain an interest from a development sponsor, the project's going to be based on what they want to build and what works best for their development company. So it could be on a site where there's an existing that they rehab. I don't know.
Okay, thank you for your help.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
Tony, of the groups that you're looking for, community groups, do they have to be 501c3?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
No, we're not looking for them to be doing any type of fundraising. This is specific for getting together, getting the community together to rally behind our plans and our goals for permanent supportive housing, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So again, No Place Like Home is for chronically homeless, mentally ill, brick and mortar only. We've been permanent supportive housing. And this is something we've been working on for a while. Housing Tools does not do housing. Housing Tools is a consultant that we hired to help us look at what we have here. And even though these three are before us, these are just kind of ideas that came from him or from them that haven't been vetted. And as Tony has stated, and we can't state enough, our first step is to find that developer, because the developer is the one who's taking on the loans, taking on the responsibility, is going to build what works for us in this community. And I think that's really important to talk about it, because it's completely different versus some of the other conversations and work that we're doing around temporary shelters, which is happening as well. This is just another arm of the homeless that we've been working on. So what's your pleasure?
Well, I'd just like to thank Tony. Excellent job, Tony.
Thank you.
Appreciate all of that. And I would move that we approve staff's recommendation, number one, approval to seek interest of groups, and number two, approve to begin the preparation of a request for qualifications.
Second that motion, Madam Chair.
First and a second, any public comment?
Hi, Mike Tompkins, Crescent City. Thank God for the work you're doing. Tony is awesome. And thank you for bringing it to this place. I know you've been working on it a long time, Lori. I'm going to advocate for the bigger one I like the idea of more because we have that much problem. Let's think big, let's think with courage and with compassion. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, I am Assistant Chief Jackson from the Probation Department, and I just want to bring forward that our juvenile hall is directly behind the site on Williams Drive. There is only one way in and one way out. Our high-risk juveniles walk by that site every single day. In addition, we do utilize the modulars that are on that property. We utilize them at least twice a week for programs for our parents and our offenders. We also utilize it for training for the actual probation officers at least once a month. So I just wanted to make sure you guys had all that information.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Come on up.
So my question is this available on a website so that we can look at that?
Are you referring to
Your presentation here.
I will have them both the presentation as well as the report from Housing Tools uploaded to our website this afternoon.
Oh, you are an awesome person. Thank you so much. And
telling you that.
I know, she is wonderful, isn't she? So the other question on there, was there a ranking on those 14 properties?
They had a process within the document where they ranked them, but it was basically based on size.
Yeah, I saw that you had mentioned environmental, size, price, zoning. So it was based on all the same characteristics. Okay.
But I want to reiterate that there's still so many other variations that would come into those, you know, that would knock some of them out.
Yeah, okay,
Like-
well, and that would be
Right,
great
they-
to consider, yeah.
Yeah, and they haven't
Those
gotten to that.
considerations would, mhm,
yeah,
yeah.
right.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other public comment on that? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Kylie?
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Moving on, you have been very patient.
That's okay. It's been an interesting morning. So, Madam Chair, Supervisors, thank you for having me today and allowed me an opportunity to update you on the activities within the OES department. I also want to thank you for your support with the proclamation for Shakeout and try to be cognizant of time because I know that we are running a little bit behind, but we've been doing a lot of work, and even though I'm a department of one, I say we because I don't operate in a silo in any manner. You know, my office works fairly closely with public health, our community partners, including our first responders, our healthcare facilities, the state, National Weather Service, Humboldt State University, the tribes, American Red Cross, the schools, and most of all, I want to highlight and elevate the hard work that our dedicated volunteers do. I have several dozen very dedicated volunteers that I cannot get any of this stuff done without their help. So, I've been with you guys for about 5 months now. In that time, sort of taken a pause and a deep breath to meet with a lot of those folks that I just listed. I wanted to figure out what's worked really well in the past, what areas where we could improve. There's also been some changes in what the state asks of us, and what the feds ask of us, and we always work in a changing environment, so just want to make sure that we're moving forward effectively. There's some foundational items that we had to address right away with sort of grants, reporting out on our grants, getting all of the paperwork done, year-end reporting, progress reporting, and so we take grants with Department of Public Health. And so we've got 3 grants with those folks. Department of Homeland Security, our EMPG grant, our Homeland Security grant, and so those are multi-year grants, so we've got several grants there. Just closed out on the Hazardous Mitigation Planning grant, so that was a big thing off of the list. And then just, you know, we also put in for a small grant with one of our local banks. We are getting ready to gear up for a large community outreach over this next year, which I'll get into here in a second. But as part of that, these various volunteer teams that I work with, something that I kept hearing was that they really like doing community outreach, and that helps me a lot. That's obviously a big part of what we do. It's difficult to do that when you have to go around and gather those items up and pack them into your truck and move them, find tables and all this stuff. So basically put together a package so that we can have a trailer that's specific for that with all of the material that we use, and so that people can just one-stop shop, get that and go. And we have all these great events in this community where we can reach out and touch the public, right? And so to make it easier for our volunteers that are helping us to continue to do that in an effective manner. We should hear on that this Friday, so keep your fingers crossed. Created a 5-year, multi-year training and exercise plan. So really looking forward, sort of long-term, where our training and exercise needs are, putting that to paper so we can start advocating for some of those. You know, there's some training and exercise comes free to us if we're loud, you know. Some of it we have to plan for budget-wise. So trying to look into the future with that. That was a lot of discussion. Anything that I mention here, there's a lot of discussion with a lot of people that goes into these things. Redwood Coast Tsunami Work Group. I'm co-chair of that group. If you may or may have not heard, there are new tsunami maps being developed right now. So those maps are looking to be released in Del Norte County in March of this next year. We are gearing up, as I was talking about community outreach, to do a full-scale community-wide exercise around tsunamis a year from Shakeout this year. And so we've got that sort of 6-month window from March to October to get that information out and educate the public. There's been a lot of discussion with that group and working with our state partners, California Geological Survey, and some other groups as far as what the most effective means of communication are with those maps. I mean, you look at it and it's a simple piece of paper, but really there's so much contingent on that as far as the way that the community perceives things, the way that evacuations are done. And it's been a while since that information was reviewed. So since we were reviewing as the science has gotten better during that time, and we've got that information, we're also reviewing just the way that we communicate, making sure that across the whole region we're communicating in sync and that we're all together on the same page. So there's been a lot of work on that. Have had some discussions with California Endowment Building Healthy Communities, as I really am working to make sure that everybody's voice is included in OES. I want to do some long-range planning for us and make sure that we're not just listening to Crescent City and not just listening to our first responders, but making sure that we're incorporating the needs of everybody in our whole community and everybody's needs as far as the citizen that we're assisting, and as well as, you know, our response partners that are helping us get the job done. So some of the things that we've brought through already, some of the training that we've had, some medical and health operation support activities, which really talks about the way that medical health operations work in the Emergency Operations Center. We've had Web EOC and EMA training, which teaches our folks in the EOC how to share situational awareness and our needs with the state. And that EMA training also talks about mutual aid assistance and how we get that request in. California Arts Emergency Management training. One of the things that I am really focused on personally is, besides all of the wonderful groups that we have doing all the work that they're doing, critical incident stress management, disaster animal response team, community emergency response team, we're trying to put together a team that's also focused on preserving our culture and heritage when there's some sort of a crisis. They're finding that in a lot of these large events where whole communities are impacted, it's really hard to recover when those items are lost and sort of the soul of the community is lost. So we don't want that to happen here. We hosted a Red Cross shelter training here and had a lot of great folks from the community come out and get those skills that if we do have an event here, we've got folks who can manage shelters for us. In a large operation, you know, there could be a period of time before Red Cross can get here to help us. And even if they are here to help us, their numbers are short as well. And so the more folks that we have here that care about our community that can step in and help fill some of those roles, the better. We've had a couple of small EOC activations, and I'm hoping that that's it for a while. We're working on clearing out our storage units. We have a couple of actual storage units. We have multiple Connex boxes, and making sure that those things are clean, organized, items rotated, items inventoried, so we know exactly what we have and where. That also helps us understand what our needs are and where our gaps are. So again, we can be effective in moving forward. Some discussions around 211, and so you had the resolution with that here not too long ago to help us distribute information to the public in a larger event. So that's moving forward, and right now sort of what's happening behind the scenes there's some conversations about what information they need from us as a county to start getting that information compiled, so when they're ready to upload that, we have it ready. The state was kind and provided us a, not really a Connex box, but a large box of supplies for disaster animal response team. It hasn't been delivered yet, but those folks and our CERT folks have been out at Ag clearing and prepping a site for that to be delivered to. We've had some great folks in the community. Hemmingson Contracting, Home Depot have donated some supplies and some effort towards that, so I want to thank them. Let's see here. We did a mass care and shelter tabletop and sort of looked at our mass care and shelter plan that was drafted by Ms. Heather Holt to see where our strengths and weaknesses lie, and that's guided some of our training and exercise that we're planning in the future. We performed a coalition surge test, surprise test at Sutter Coast Hospital, which I feel bad. We kind of stressed them out there for a second, walked in one day and said, hey, guess what we're going to do? But they jumped in with both feet and did a really excellent job. And so what that was basically a pretend scenario where they had to evacuate that facility. Not really, but you know, we worked through the exercise in a short amount of time and figured out what other facilities could take the folks that are housed there and how they would transport them and what amount of time that would take. And the community should know they performed very, very well. So that was great to see. Coming up here in the near future, and Kylie's got some materials that I handed out to you. We've got some things in the works. Towards the end of this month, we're bringing crisis management for school-based incidents to town. I just got the update email this morning. We've got 21 folks signed up for that already. It's only been out about 10 days, so that's really good to get our folks at the school district and some of our first responders together in the same room to learn about how we can work cooperatively in those incidents. Agents of Bioterrorism is getting hosted down in Humboldt County also later this month. We have quite a few folks from here going down there. You don't think that that sort of thing can happen here, but it can. So we're going to go get a little more educated on that. Bringing functional assessment service team training in at the beginning of the year. And so that's for our folks that works with like access and functionally needs folks. In shelter situations, to provide them a little bit more training, we'll have a team trained locally, and that team will also be available for deployment. We're bringing ChemPAC training in at the beginning of the year. Cal OES has been working with CSTI here in the region. We're not exactly sure where it's going to be housed yet, but we're going to have EOC ICS interface training, EOC ops and management training, and a little bit later next year, we're bringing in recovery planning training, which is something that I think I noted my first time up here that I think is really, really important for us to have a recovery plan in place. And I would like to see that get completed in the next 5 years. So this is sort of the first step in that direction. In November is the statewide medical health exercise. We've reserved the fairgrounds for a day that week so that we can practice all the shelter training that we've been doing, that we have coming up. We're going to get everybody together. We're going to stand up a full shelter, and we're going to do some assessment of folks as they come in for medical and health needs. And so we can get a little bit practice there. We have lots of things that we need to practice before next year for this tsunami evacuation scenario. Hopefully that's the first thing where we really have to practice these things in the next year. And then back to that part there, the as we gear up with these new maps that are going to be available in March, we've rented out the Cultural Center for March 21st. That's a Saturday. That's going to be a annual, I'm hoping, preparedness fair. So we've invited our community response partners. We're going to have our volunteers there. We're going to have HSU, the Redwood Coast Tsunami Work Group. So we're going to provide a lot of education on these maps. We're going to do tsunami walks downtown there, but we're also going to have a lot of other educational materials there and educational folks there. I've been speaking with the state about getting some speakers in for us. I want to make it an interesting and fun day for our whole community. And I'm really looking forward to that. So with all of that, and the schools, I think it's important that we mention the schools too. I've had a lot of great conversation with Superintendent Harris and some other folks over there. Again, long-range planning for us. I hate to always be so reactive. I feel like we should be proactive, and the best way to be proactive is that we provide this education on a regular basis in the schools. And so looking to bring STEP training, which I provided you a booklet on that. That's something new that FEMA's doing. It's sort of aimed towards that 5th grade-ish year, and so it's real basic, like 5 hours. We're looking at 5 one-hour deliveries over the course of a week to bring some information to that age group, and then we're going to start doing some CERT training in the high school and build that up over the next couple of years. And so I think that that's great, that we can start graduating our kids here, and that's just a part of life and just part of what they think about. That's a big goal. Yeah. And I think that it's timely that I'm here today too. I don't know how much everyone's heard about the public safety power shut-off event that's happening to the south of us. Information literally keeps changing by the minute on that. That is a PG&E event, so nobody in Delaware County needs to worry. Our power is not getting shut off. However, that said, right now they're looking at portions or wholly of 39 counties. This is going to be the largest event like this in California. So last number I got was 775,000 customers. I've been told that for every customer, you can count about 3 people. So we're talking about a very large number of people impacted. We all have friends, family, loved ones that live in those areas. There will be other cascading effects for us. They're starting to talk about, ambulance strike teams to move folks around, the medically fragile that'll be impacted by those. So we're just trying to assess right now what sort of cascading effects we might look at, and also what ways we might be able to assist our partners. We certainly want people to come help us when we need it, and so we'll be looking to see in what ways we can go help them. With that, I don't know if you had any questions for me, but...
Excellent. Any questions for Ms. Scott from the board?
I just have a comment, Kimmy. Sure. Thank you so much. It's amazing to me that you've been here 5 months and this is all you're working on. I'm all kidding aside. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Great job. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kimmy, for a great update. City of Gold Beach recently decommissioned some of their tsunami sirens.
Yes.
Obsolete, high maintenance, a number of choices. I think there were 17 of them, and I'm not sure how many remaining, maybe 4, something like that. Is that something you're considering doing here in terms of how we notify people if there's a tsunami?
So I'll tell you that's something that I think that we should assess on an ongoing basis as far as cost versus reward, like we do with anything. Right now, there's no plans to shut down our sirens. I know that when this happened up in Curry County, there was a lot of discussion on some of our local Facebook pages, and I think that the folks that live in our community really value the sirens. With any sort of event, we always want multiple ways to notify people because any 1 or 2 ways could go down. So while there's still benefit for us for those to be there, we should leave them in place. I don't want to be reactive with anything. So, like I said, I'm trying to assess everything right now. Oh, there's a lot to assess. At first glance, it looks like they're still providing a good benefit for us, and as I get my feet grounded in everything that they're getting grounded in, we'll take a closer look.
Well, back in 2011, the last time we had the latest tsunami, I don't remember the sirens going off, but I do remember or hearing 4:30 in the morning, the Crescent City Police Department door knocking. And that was their way in which was effective because it got everybody out of the area. So a deployment of personnel might be something you might consider, organizing people in terms of letting people know, neighbors letting neighbors know, get out now because it's a short warning. Rather than, again, the cost for these sirens is it's considerable, the maintenance on them, and whether they're working or not. So thanks for considering that.
We'll definitely take a look.
Supervisor Howard?
I have got to echo Supervisor Hemmingson's piece. You've gotten your feet wet rather rapidly on a variety of topics that I'd hate to see anybody without this kind of passion for the subject. You're clearly an adrenaline junkie when it comes to this kind of work. It is one of those things that you get little credit for, but affects a lot of lives. And looking forward in the future, I love the idea of being proactive. It's going to be critical for anything, but especially tsunami awareness and fire danger hazards around our community. I'd encourage you to continue using all the resources at your disposal, and more importantly, just want to reflect back on one of your comments that you do not operate in a silo, and I'm glad you see that because it takes a team to make this work in such a small county with such limited resources. I'm so happy to hear the support that you're getting from members of our staff and the folks here in our community. So keep up the good work.
We really have a great team here.
Kimmy, I just want to reiterate the comments that the other supervisors have made. You're doing a tremendous job for only being here 5 months.
Thank you so much.
You're all correct. You didn't just dip your toe, you jumped in with both feet and hit the ground running, and we do appreciate the work you're doing. And it's you see that a lot, the partnerships and the teams. And you have a good team around you, and you use your partnerships and your partners around you, which is really important. So thank you very much for coming. You also have something in front of you. Do you want to read that right now, Supervisor Howard, please?
Certainly will, since we do
Thank
probably
you.
have the person here that's going to receive this. So let me get started. This is a proclamation of the Delaware County Board of Supervisors. Whereas Delaware County's proximity to major fault systems both on and offshore make it vulnerable to earthquakes, and whereas earthquakes can occur any time with no warning and have been known to cause destruction to property, injury, and even death, and whereas everyone everywhere should know to protect themselves during earthquakes wherever they live, work, or travel to an area where earthquakes are common. And whereas the Great Shakeout earthquake drills are an annual opportunity to learn and practice earthquake safety with millions of people around the world. And whereas the goal of the Shakeout is to encourage people and organizations to be prepared to survive and recover quickly when the next big earthquake happens, including practice of drop, cover, and hold, other aspects of emergency plans, and whereas 2019 International Shakeout Day is October 17th, with most people participating at 10:17 a.m. local time, whereas participation is free and may only take a few minutes. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Delaware County Board of Supervisors proclaimed October 17th, 2019 as Shakeout Day in Delaware County, and encourage all citizens to learn more and register to participate at shakeout.org. Passed and adopted this day, the 8th day of October 2019, signed by our Chair Cowan.
Thank you. And if I may, I would like to encourage our public to post their Shakeout pictures to our Facebook page on Shakeout. There's some really fun ones that I've seen in the past, so let's keep that going.
Great. Thank
Thanks.
you very much. Okay, gentlemen,
Public
moving
comment.
on to 18. We have in front of us, yep. No.
17 was contingent on 18.
Well, it is, but we still need to discuss it.
Okay.
We have before us the approve and authorize the chair to sign the lease termination agreement with Matthew S. Variant, an individual doing business at Front Street Plaza. You want to talk about this? How do we want to go forward?
I'll just give a summary if you don't mind.
Not at all.
As you see, the item that I brought before you, the agreement was contingent upon approval of child supports lease, which was not approved. Therefore, my lease is not a question at this moment, but I would be asking for further direction. I wanted just to give a very short overview of the history of this item, as it's been and apparently will continue to drag out more. So the original lease for 2nd Street for AOD was signed in July of 2013. It was a 3-year lease. There was a subsequent 10-year lease that was signed in April for it to go through 2026. December 11th of last year, the board acknowledged a resolution to integrate AOD and mental health into behavioral health. And at that same time, also on the agenda, the early termination agreement was brought forward. As was discussed by council, our leases did not have a termination for convenience clause, therefore one was negotiated at that time. There was not a vote on the item. However, the board directed staff to, staff being me, to meet with the landlord and council to discuss the item. And I brought it back in January for discussion, just to give an update to let everybody know that I was having those discussions. It was then discovered that child support, who it was well known that they had been looking for a new building for several years, that they were continuing to look and that it could be a good fit for them. So since that time, those conversations have continued to take place. We've continued to pay the monthly rent, as that is what our current agreement says. I will say, even though we're continuing to pay the monthly rent, we, without occupying the space, do still have a savings because we're not paying maintenance or IT costs that we were before. And I will just say, over the course of the remainder of the agreement, if it were to have been approved, we would have over $500,000 in savings that we will not have now without it being approved. So at this point, I would look for direction to you. We otherwise would continue to pay rent as the agreement stands, about $37,000 a year. And the building maintenance, IT costs, and insurance are about $56,000 a year. So I would leave that to you. I really thought that this was a win-win, these two agreements to come together. The board really wanted to see an alternative offered for that space. Even without an alternative, we were going to realize savings without utilizing it with a early termination. And now I would look to you for recommendations for how to move forward.
Questions from the dais?
I have some solutions to where we want to go with this. Is the board ready to entertain some kind of an offer as a payoff? Because I don't see it in the narrative here of what are the suggested, what are the amounts to mitigate this lease and end this long period. I think we've paid so far this year $27,500 for the vacated premises. We originally were going to, according to the consent agenda, which I pulled off and opposed, $162,899. So let's call it $163. So that leaves a residual amount outstanding once we paid that of $135,500 left from that 163 total. So is the board willing to hear a payoff so we can end this dribbling and drabbling of resources, state's resources through our county at this time? If they are, I'll make that number available now.
I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Well, where I'm going is I'm offering a payoff for the residual amount of the lease, which has about 7 years to go.
So you're potentially asking for consensus to give direction to our director to go back to the landlord to negotiate a payout?
Yes.
Okay. I think my concern, Supervisor Howard, do you have anything to chime in before?
Just listening.
Supervisor Berkowitz, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think that's what we're asking for, is to negotiate a payout.
Okay. And I think my concern with that is our Director of Child Services has come to us well before this, looking for a new facility. And this is a facility that he, as a director, that we appointed him to make these decisions, that he would like this facility, and now we have told him he needs to go through the process again. So, I'm not sure, I feel like I'm waiting to see if that works out before we do this. And you're saying you'd just like to get rid of this and that option altogether.
Well, Chairman, what is our expectation on item number 18? We're here to discuss it. This is, it's titled a lease termination agreement. So let's put it out as a lease termination agreement and put a number out, give it to Ms. Snow, and bring it to Mr. Faring to see if it's approved. And if it is, then we'll stop dribbling and drabbling money. Otherwise, if we do nothing, we'll eventually pay him $163,000 plus a lot more if we sit here on our hands and do nothing. So I'm offering to make that number available now with some kind of consensus if the board wants to hear it. Otherwise, we'll have this discussion on 18 for the next several meetings.
What has changed, just curiosity, what has changed between now and then? Before you were adamant, you were not going to pay this, you didn't
You know,
want
my
to pay
Chairman,
out.
I'm not going to go
just
back. I'm
asking
not
a
going to
question.
go back to
I'm
17
asking
again.
what
No,
is-
I know what
it's
you're
not
asking. I know what you're
17,
asking.
It was just last
Okay,
year.
I know.
And
I
I'm
know, and
curious-
that's your interpretation.
I have a right to ask a question and to
And-
speak right
okay.
now, and I'm speaking right now. And I've given you, so my question is what has changed? This came before us earlier in the year, and you were adamant about it. What has changed between then and now that you're willing to do a payout that you weren't?
We are finished discussing 17. You are still back on 17, Chairman. Now,
No, we're talking about a
we're
payout.
talking about 18 right now. Now, you read the agreement. It's a lease termination agreement. I'm offering to make a settlement, not 163,000, not 163 less the 27.5 we've already paid. I'm offering a number to see if the board agrees to bring this number to Mr. Faring to satisfy the 7 years residual left on this lease. That's as simple as I can make it, not what's changed or whatever. I'm looking for the solution, and I'm offering the solution.
Can I just straightforward ask you a question as what has changed from earlier this year when it was a discussion of a payout and you were vehemently against it to now? Why?
The word is vehemently, and I was not against a payout. I was against a payout of $162,899 and some pennies.
So nothing's changed. Your mind just changed.
I
You have no
I
reason
said that's
behind
too
it,
high a
that's fine.
figure.
Okay,
You're not happy
so-
with the answer I'm giving you. I apologize.
Do we have a number in front of us for you to go back and do a payout at this time?
I don't have a number in front of me because that was not the agreement that I brought forward today. I would be happy to go back to the landlord if that's the direction of the board. I will add that he's been, in my experience, very fair, very cooperative, and to our benefit, very patient with this process as we've gone through
Very
over the last
patient.
8 months. And just to be clear, the lower amount would not be because we would be paying less. It would be because it's deducted by the amount of rent that we've continued to pay over the course of the last 8 months.
Right. So what is the pleasure of the board?
I would like to move that we go back, have Heather negotiate with Matt Fearing for a lower amount payout.
Lower amount than what he's already done?
Yeah.
So she's already been working with him over the past 9 months.
You know, we asked in the last meeting, we had consensus that we were going to bring this up basically as a standalone item to renegotiate the payout. That's where we are, and that's where we should be now.
No, we've been negotiating with him in a contract on a totally different item for the building. So that's what you have been negotiating with TAB and with Faring from future facilities, which you sit on, a lease agreement. You can't, you're asking this guy to do two things, a lease agreement and now negotiate a payout. You got to choose one or the other.
No, you don't.
Can the public make any comments there? Or
public comment on item number 18. Come on up.
Let me just give kind of an objective observation of what's going on. You entered into a lease. You were 2 years into a 10-year lease. You decided to merge the departments. You brought that before the board with no discussion of any kind of a penalty or a payoff. The board approves the merger. At a subsequent meeting, after that, all of a sudden, you introduced to the board $163,000 payoff or penalty. That's my understanding.
I understand, but we had the information. So
Okay,
I
that's
understand
fine,
what
that's
you think.
fine.
We had the
But that's my understanding. Okay, so now you just had, your solution was to take another department, to move them over into a space. If anybody would have vetted that space, you would see that it's not suitable. You might say that here, you might say it, you all might say it, but if anybody would have looked at the floor plans and the space and the parking and the security and the actual numbers, it wasn't suitable. So you did the right thing today by not voting to approve that lease and to go back and to look at it. I was never done negotiating. Now it has come before the board, should we go back to the landlord, now that you're not going to be able to force another department that is not suitable into space that's not suitable for 10 years? Now the question has come up. I mean, I see you laughing.
I'm not laughing, but you're
Look,
saying
I'm a
it's not
business-man. Let me just
suitable.
make
It
some
is
sense.
suitable.
No, it's
Our
not. You
director
haven't looked at
brought
the
it
floor
to us.
plans.
Madam Chairman, would you quit arguing
Let's just
with the
stop. Yeah,
person
quit
during his
arguing,
3 minutes?
okay? Just quit arguing and listen for a second. Now the suggestion is that you go back to the landlord and you see if the landlord would be receptive to reduce price for a payoff on a lease that you're not going to use. Okay, so you're not going to be able to get another department. You're going to have to go out to an RFP again, which is the right thing to do. So now that it's before the board, should you go back to Matt Faring to see if he will accept a reduced price on the payoff to get you out of this situation? So you say, what has changed? What has changed is the number could be less than $163,000. That's what has changed. Why doesn't somebody go ask the landlord if he would be receptive to a reduced payoff so you're not in this situation, so that you're not trying to force a department into space that's not suitable for them? It makes sense. That's my comment.
I'm going to respond to that because we're not forcing anybody. That's what I think you don't, or maybe you're missing, is that our department, our director, has been looking at this for a long time. Everybody has been. He was planning on leaving the current building long before this incident.
Because he wanted out of the tsunami zone.
We are not forcing, that's not the only reason. We are not forcing him, it's what they chose. So just because two voted against that, two of us understand the process and that what he chose, what our director chose.
Well,
That, and he feels it's suitable and it has been vetted. So to say it hasn't been vetted.
It
is
didn't go to
not-
future facilities, Lori, and you know that.
Yes, it did.
Did you see it, Bob? You sit on the committee?
No.
Okay, so it wasn't there. It wasn't vetted. You know, and so you're saying it's vetted and it wasn't vetted.
It has gone to future
Well,
facilities
Bob must have
twice.
been asleep, I guess, when he vetted the numbers.
It has been vetted, and it had
Okay.
gone to future
All right,
facility
all right, all right.
twice.
So-
That's why I'm frustrated, and I'm not trying to laugh at you at all.
No,
I
it's-
think
it's not laugh.
I read the letter that you sent, and
Good.
and I realized that you either have misinformation on some things or haven't been told the whole story. So I just want to clarify that everybody has gone out, that the director has vetted the property, has been doing it for long over,
We
for
can,
over
you
9
can stop.
months.
We can stop. You're trying to use the $163,000 penalty that you're facing as partial justification to move a department into another space. That's obvious. So why don't you, since you're not going to be able to do that now, why don't you deal with the existing lease that you're in and see whether there's any negotiation room for you?
They have been doing that. She has been doing that. That has
She
been
just
going
said she hasn't been doing that.
She has
She
been-
said, I haven't discussed it with Matt
on.
Faring.
The the final number, but she has gone back. Heather, do you want to talk about the communications you've had with him regarding this, or is it important? But
I believe, with my understanding of the situation, I believe that Matt Fairing would be very willing to negotiate that lease penalty that you're faced with. And that's what's being discussed.
Okay, so
Okay.
are you going to make a motion, Supervisor Gitlin, to terminate this?
Terminate the lease termination agreement? Yes, I am.
Okay. And you have seconded that?
I will.
Okay, and I'll take further.
I'm sorry, I don't even know where to begin, Supervisor. You know, I'll bring this back to reality, I think. Supervisor Gitlin attacked staff heads and departments because they owed a whole bunch of money in a big lease. Well, what Supervisor Gitlin doesn't tell you, and I think I'm pretty right about this, Supervisor Gitlin motioned to approve that lease. He was the origin of the lease. Am I wrong there?
No, you are not wrong.
So Supervisor Gitlin motioned to approve a lease. He's just not accountable for anything. So he doesn't have to stand there and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. No,
Mr.
this is my
Dorrego,
time.
it was
You
a
get plenty of
consent
time up there.
agenda
This is my
item.
3 minutes. It's a consent agenda item that you motioned for and then degrade county staff because things don't go so well and you look at a public opportunity to look like some savior. You don't have a foundation on which you stand. I've said this before about you. Left, right, one. Just the other day, I'm a cannabis shop owner. I fought to exist. Just the other day, you decided it was a free market should decide it all. We don't want to mainstream a problematic product and destroy our community's youth, except for you really don't like me, do you? So that would work in that case, right? And I mean, it goes on and on like this. I mean, from trying to get the firing of our newspaper editor, to going to a halfway house for women that operates for men and saying it's going to be a magnet for... You have no foundation, Supervisor Gitlin. Supervisor Berkowitz, yes, someone probably fell asleep somewhere. Supervisor Gitlin did. He forgot that he was ranting against himself. He should have been saying, I did this. This is ridiculous. I've just cost the community $100 and some odd grand. Instead, he looked around. I think he pointed at you. And somebody's got to be able to stand up here and say, Supervisor Gitlin, develop some sort of moral foundation, because it's not just a description. It's not just a Facebook profile. You need to actually stand by your words once in a while, I think. I don't know, but he did motion for this lease, right? And now he wants to bury it out while the room's like empty, right? Just pay it out and get it over with. Why? Do you have a relationship with the landlord that would benefit from this? Should you have recused yourself? I have that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item 18?
And I'm sorry, I would like to add that I have worked trying to get a lease with, I believe it's Matt Fairing's properties, and I talked to other people who had sublet or leased from him, and the one comment I got was, you don't know the difference in leasing from somebody who maintains their properties. I was very happy with being a tenant from him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just get a clarification on the motion?
This is a recommendation to authorize the chair to sign the lease termination agreement with Matthew Fairing, an individual doing business as Front Street Plaza, for the property located at 1279 2nd Street, Suite C, effective the end of this month, October 31st, contingent upon the board approval and signature of the Department of Child Support's agreement with Fairing, which I think is moot because it's been voted down. So I don't know how this, that we can add that child support services component to this lease. So I think the agreement we have is, I'll repeat it again, approve and authorize the chair to sign the lease termination agreement with Matthew Fairing, an individual doing business as Front Street Plaza for the property located at 1279 2nd Street, Suite C, Crescent City, 95531.
Chair, my question is,
I'm going to ask County something. Go ahead.
My question was just, it was contingent upon the approval, and it did not get
Right.
approved, and she was seeking direction from the board to move forward.
And
So
that-
that's my confusion.
Yeah, and mine as well. So I'm going to refer to council. Because of the way it's written, can we just give her direction right now and not take a vote on this?
So this lease termination, it's a zero. It includes no payout of anything, but the landlord's desire to do that was based on the child support whole thing, and so therefore, that's why it's contingent on the board's approval. He's not going to sign it. He's not going to do a zero out.
Right.
As
we've
far
been
as my
negotiating. Right,
understanding
okay.
from the department heads on this, that he wouldn't be doing that without.
So my understanding then is the best we can do right now with this is ask the director.
So it
Ms.
says
Snow,
if
to-
DCSS agreement is not approved, then discuss and direct staff regarding a DHHS lease.
Right.
And regarding the address. So maybe modifying the motion to what,
do we need to
what
do a
you want
motion at
to.
all, or just a consensus of give direction?
You don't need to, but
Okay.
if somebody wants to, you could.
Well, I feel that there's really not a motion to approve right now, but I believe that Heather probably needs direction. So it sounds like from Supervisor Gitlin and Berkowitz, they would like you to go back and talk to Matt about what the dollar amount would be if we were to do a payout. And then that we would bring that back.
Chair Cowan?
Yes,
May I please?
Supervisor Howard.
I'm confused.
Absolutely.
And I just need to ask for CAO's opinion on this, because there was, a vote was taken and there wasn't obviously consensus reached on item number 17, but there was consensus reached on giving CAO, somebody from child support, direction to go out and potentially even at some point refly an RFP where this facility could be included. I'm just thinking to myself, and I gotta get this from CAO, best strategy moving forward. Are we premature with this decision at this point in time? What's your thoughts?
Well, this one is contingent on the approval of the first, and that didn't happen. So it's a moot point in regards to the approval of this lease termination at this point. The second part of that is to direct staff regarding existing DHSS lease agreement, which you were getting to. You have two supervisors who are asking the director to go back and negotiate a number. She stated that the number is likely going to be a lower number because we've already paid off a considerable amount of that. The other two supervisors have yet to weigh in on that direction. And generally, when we get direction, we'd like to have consensus. But that would be the next step, would be, is that the direction that we give the director to go back to the landlord and negotiate that final number?
County Council Cable, can I ask a question of clarification on this? Subject to this kind of muddied water with this motion that we are about to make, can we make this motion subject to the mutually agreeable decision that all parties agree to a number, subject to negotiation? Now, I mean, I didn't imply this motion to include a zero payout. I have a number in mind, and I'd like to make this number, well, let's keep it under the wrap for right now, but I think what I'd like to do is make this motion subject to mutually agreeable terms and conditions, which is a
So
money issue.
would
Can
it
that
be-
not be done?
Would it be a motion to negotiate a lease termination and then the amount that you have in mind?
No, I
or-
don't think we want to put, I think we want to give the direction at this point is to, let's see the number that we can come up with, and then bring it back to our board. I've offered to come up with a number.
Yeah, I
and-
think that's all fine in terms of a motion, yeah.
Okay, subject to mutually agreeable terms and conditions. This isn't a $0. Someone on this board said it's $0. That's not the intention of this motion whatsoever.
So the lease
Well, yes, but
agreement-
I'm changing it. I'm asking this to be subject to mutually agreeable
So
terms and
the-
conditions.
The actual agreement that's written, that's in your board materials, we can't move forward on that
No,
because
so it's a
that
moot point.
language was only agreed to by the parties based on this whole other Department of Child Support. So we can't approve that agreement.
All right, so
But
18
we
is
can-
off of any kind of motion. There's no motion.
Right.
It's a simple
You-
direction. Is that right,
Well,
Liz?
we had another item earlier that there was a motion on that was a direction to staff. So a direction to staff can be done by motion or it can be done by consensus.
And I prefer, as said on the bottom, to come up with consensus, not to take an action, because the first part of item 18 is a moot point. But I am comfortable with getting consensus from the board to give Heather direction.
That's all right with me. That's fine, as long as we come to an end on
I'm
this
not
and see. Well, may I speak without your interrupting me? I think it's a difficult and complicated, problematic situation which we're in right now, which was created because of a number that was astonishingly high to two of our members on this Board of Supervisors. We weren't forewarned of this, and then we voted on it. And if we did vote on it, then we need to review that number again to see if there's a number below 163,000, less the 27,500 that's already been paid this year, and then come up with a negotiable number that was originally on the December 11th, 2018 lease. That would be my intention of giving you direction, Heather, from this board as one of its members to how to best satiate and satisfy this ongoing problem. Again, if we sit and do nothing, month after, may I speak?
No,
you're interrupting me, and this is something you always do. I'm not finished with my thought. Now, if this is something that this board feels it wants to take back to Mr. Faring to find a number that's wants to present this board, then we can take a vote on it. And that's what I'd like to do.
How do you find that in consensus of going back again and negotiating with Mr.
I'm
Faring?
recalling the history that was just recited to us about how this all got started, combinations of services and everything else, which was supposedly going to reduce our cost long run. We get to the point of making a decision, it's pulled off the table because somebody didn't want to do it. That's fine, but we had the opportunity to buy this out 9 months ago, and yet we've dragged it on to the point. We come up with a solution to the issue that's going to save us dollars, and I'm just scratching my head the reasons why, and I've heard some public comment on this today. I still got to ask the question why. Chair has asked the question why. Why are we here? And I guess I'm just never going to have an answer to that question. So, no, you don't have consensus.
And I don't, yeah, I think with what's the direction we gave after 17, I don't want to confuse it even more by giving conflicting, because we're giving conflicting direction. So I don't think you have a consensus, Director Snow, at this time. Okay, so we are done with 18, and we're going to move on to item 19. We have two, oh, you want to grab Supervisor Hemmingson, please? Welcome back. Okay, we are now at item 19, approve and adopt budget transfer 0653 in the amount of $328,185 within the public safety realignment budget. And then budget transfer 10-01 in the amount of $306 within the planning division budget department.
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do we have any public comment on items 19 or 20? Seeing none, Eileen?
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Okay, that will conclude our meeting for today. The next meeting is October 22nd. We'll see everyone there.